You've been told a lie your whole life. Not with bad intentions, not as a conspiracy, but as a consequence of habit, of culture, of limitation. The lie? That you are a single, consistent self. One identity. One personality. One story playing out across time. But that's not how reality works. And it's definitely not how you work. This video is not just information. It's a doorway. Once you pass through, there's no going back to thinking of yourself as fixed, static, or confined. We're stepping into a larger framework. One rooted in quantum possibility, neural flexibility, psychological complexity, and a truth you've always felt but never had the words to describe. You aren't just one version of yourself. You are all the versions you've imagined, all the versions you've denied, all the versions you've forgotten, the ones you could have been, and the ones you still might become. In this video, we're going to break the myth of the singular self wide open. You'll come to understand how quantum mechanics and consciousness might not be as separate as they seem. How the observer effect applies not just to particles but to identity. How you can learn to access other possible versions of yourself with intention, not just reflection. We're not interested in shallow metaphors or mystical buzzwords. This is grounded. This is structured. You'll learn how your memory shapes and distorts who you think you are. How your imagination isn't just playful but architectural. How your fears may actually be messages from parallel selves who never got their turn. And how to consciously shift into alternate versions of your identity on purpose. This isn't a motivational video. It's a quantum mirror. And by the end of this journey, you won't be asking, "Who am I?" anymore. You'll be asking, "Who am I now?" Because here's the reality. You are not a noun. You are a verb, an evolving equation, probability cloud, a chorus of identities waiting to be called forth. In the chapters ahead, we'll break through traditional models of self. We'll step beyond linear growth and explore what it means to live as a multidimensional identity in a reality that responds to your perception. You're about to understand why you've always felt larger than your life, why parts of you whisper even when you're not listening, and how the self isn't something you find. It's something you generate. So stay with me, because now, we begin. Stop thinking of yourself as one thing, one idea, one path. That concept of the real you is not just outdated, it's actively limiting your evolution. We begin by dismantling this cultural obsession with a single identity. You've been conditioned to believe that finding your true self is the goal, that your identity is hidden under layers of mistakes, conditioning, or societal noise, just waiting to be uncovered like some buried artifact. But the truth is more radical. There is no singular self to find, because you aren't one thing. You are a spectrum of selves, all running parallel, layered, waiting for your attention. Your identity isn't an object. It's a process. The person watching this video isn't the same person who woke up this morning. And you're not the same person you were 5 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago. Every idea you take in, every emotion you feel, every perspective you shift slightly toward or away from, adjusts the entire field of who you are. Now add this: every imagined version of yourself you've ever created also exists. Not just as daydreams, not just as missed opportunities, but as actual configurations within your consciousness. Potential selves. Dormant but accessible. These aren't fantasies. They are identities your nervous system has already begun to sketch. Each thought of, "I could be a person who," that's not an empty idea. It's a portal. The artist you thought about becoming when you were 15, still inside. The fearless speaker, still coded in your neurons. The hermit, the leader, the healer, the rebel. None of these were hypothetical. They are quantum drafts of you, still circulating, still accessible. So why don't we live as them? Why do we default to one version of ourselves and stick with it for decades? Because it's easier to manage. Predictable identity is efficient, socially reinforced, easy to explain. People can categorize you. You can categorize yourself. The single self model feels stable. But that stability comes at a cost, because it blocks you from stepping into the selves you haven't yet dared to explore. Here's where things get even more interesting. Your brain does not operate in isolation. Consciousness is not local. Some of the most provocative theories in quantum physics suggest that reality isn't definite until it's observed. That means everything exists in probabilities. Until something chooses to focus on it. Now apply that to you. You exist in a cloud of possible identities. Infinite versions of you, each one slightly or vastly different, depending on how you observe yourself. And by choosing to focus on one idea of yourself, one set of behaviors, beliefs, patterns, you collapse that possibility into your current reality. Not because it's true, but because you focused on it. This is not self-help jargon. This is quantum interpretation applied to human identity. And while it's not mainstream science yet, it reflects something deeply intuitive. You change depending on how you see yourself, which means you are the observer, and the self you experience right now is just one of many collapsed realities. Let that sink in. When you said, "I'm just not that kind of person," what you really meant was, I haven't observed that version of myself long enough to collapse it into this reality. But it exists. The version of you who says yes instead of no. The one who stands instead of hesitates. The one who forgave, or fought back, or created something impossible. You don't have to become that version. You already are. You just haven't shifted into it yet. So where does imagination fit into this? Not as entertainment, not as a hobby, but as the signal flare of who else you could be. Imagination is the language through which these alternate selves first begin speaking to you. When you dream about a bolder you, a stranger you, a more dangerous or beautiful or wise you, that's not fiction. That's your brain handing you an identity file and asking, do you want to run this version now? You don't need a lifetime to shift. You need a decision. But first, you need to let go of the story that there's only one real you. That idea is the cage. That belief is the mask. The truth is, you are a quantum self. And just like a particle, who you are shifts based on how you're observed, especially how you observe yourself. Now that we've shattered the illusion of a singular self, next we will look into the phenomenon that makes this fluidity possible. The observer effect, and the mirror that reflects not just your face, but your possibilities. Now that we've shattered the illusion of being one fixed identity, the real question emerges. How exactly does this shift happen? How do possibilities turn into actual experiences of self? The answer starts with the observer, not an abstract one, not a mystical force, but you. You are the observer of yourself. And how you observe shapes not just how you act, but who you are. This isn't philosophy. It's a principle that echoes from quantum theory itself. In experiments like the double-slit, particles behave differently simply because they're being watched. Observation collapses potential into outcome. Apply this not to a photon, but to your identity. You are not observing a self. You are generating one in real time, through perception, attention, and interpretation. You are the mirror, and the moment you look into yourself, something happens. You freeze part of the fluid field. You define. You frame. You lock one of many potential identities into focus. But here's what no one tells you. The mirror you're using is not neutral. It's quantum. It reflects not what is, but what you're capable of seeing. The quantum mirror doesn't just show you. It interacts with you. The version of you it reveals depends on the energy, belief, and expectation you bring into it. That's why two people can go through the same situation and emerge with entirely different selves. They weren't experiencing the same mirror. They weren't observing the same version. Think about how you act around different people. With some, you're bold. With others, you shrink. With one group, you're analytical. With another, emotional. This isn't inconsistency. It's quantum activation. Each social context, each environment, reflects a different possible version of you, and that version becomes real only when observed. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. Because when you consciously observe yourself observing, the system multiplies. You don't just react, you begin to select. Not from one identity, but from a full spectrum. You gain access to the control panel. The quantum mirror teaches one crucial truth. Identity is interactive. You're not discovering who you are. You're choosing who you become by the lens you use. Let's go deeper. When you look into this mirror, your expectations matter more than your history. Most people use memory as their primary mirror. This is who I've always been, they say, but that's just a habitual observation, a recursive loop. You see what you expect. You expect what you remember. Break that loop, and the mirror begins to change. You start seeing not the past, but the probable. Not the familiar, but the available. You begin to notice selves you'd previously ignored, versions that didn't fit the old identity. And slowly, you stop mistaking memory for destiny. There's a reason so many people feel stuck in their lives. They're using a dirty mirror, a mirror that only reflects back limitation. But change the angle, shift the lighting, and a whole new version appears. Here's a practice worth trying. Instead of asking, "Who am I really?" ask, "Who becomes visible when I observe with love, with courage, with wild curiosity?" You'll notice the mirror responds. And this is where it gets even more interesting. The quantum mirror doesn't just reflect what you believe, it reflects what you dare to believe. A new identity often appears first as discomfort, a strange sense of unreality. That's not because it's fake. It's because it's new to your perceptual system. It hasn't been stabilized through repeated observation yet. That discomfort is a sign you're stepping into a fresh self. Keep looking. Keep observing with attention and openness. The mirror will stabilize the new you, but ignore it and it fades. The quantum self collapses back into the undefined. That's not a punishment, it's physics. The reality you refuse to witness cannot stay solid. So how do you use the mirror well? You don't just stare. You engage. You speak into it. You project into it. You consciously choose lenses that show you the version of yourself aligned with where you want to be, not just where you've been. You choose curiosity over criticism, possibility over pattern, presence over past, because that's what this mirror responds to: focused observation with intention. Not passive reflection, active creation. And when you get this, really get it, you realize something extraordinary. You can always change. You can always become. Not because you're escaping something, but because your identity is a living interaction, and you are the observer who shapes it. Now that you've met the mirror, you're ready to meet what lives inside it. The version of you that has made every choice you never did. The one who succeeded, the one who failed, the one who walked away, or stayed. Next, we will reveal the truth hiding behind the quantum mirror, that you are not either slash or, you are both. Always have been. You've seen how your identity reflects and shifts based on observation. But let's go further. Let's talk about a paradox that doesn't just challenge how you see yourself. It redefines it. It's rooted in one of the most iconic ideas from quantum physics, Schrödinger's cat. A cat inside a box is considered both alive and dead until it's observed. The act of looking collapses the possibilities into one state. But until then, both outcomes exist simultaneously. Now replace the cat with you. Not metaphorically, literally. Because before you choose, before you act, before you identify, you are multiple versions. You are both the hero and the villain, the brave one and the fearful one, the loyal one and the betrayer, the dreamer and the cynic. They're not symbolic opposites. They are active selves held in superposition. And they are waiting to be collapsed into experience by observation, by belief, by choice. This is not moral relativism. This is ontological truth. You have lived the life of someone who succeeded, and the life of someone who sabotaged it all. Both exist in the realm of potential. Both are fully accessible. The only difference is the one you've continued to observe. Your current identity is a result, not a truth. It's the version that survived the collapse. But just outside your habitual focus, the other selves remain. Let's make this sharper. When you remember a failure, you often carry guilt or regret. But what you rarely realize is that there's another version of you, the one who made a different choice, the one who didn't freeze, the one who spoke up, or walked away, or didn't say yes when everything inside screamed no. That version is real. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, structurally, neurologically, energetically. It's encoded into your system. You don't feel its presence as memory. you feel it as tension, conflict, a strange emotional residue from choices never made. This is the source of much inner fragmentation. You feel torn not because you're indecisive, but because your identity field contains competing realities, each trying to stabilize. The hero you admire and the villain you fear, both are you. The problem isn't that you're either one. The problem is thinking you're only one. This is where personal power begins, in the radical understanding that every version of you is alive until collapsed. Choice is not just a moral act. It's a quantum selection. Each time you decide, you collapse a field of identity into one experience. But the rest doesn't vanish. It recedes into possibility. It becomes the background, waiting for another moment of attention. This is why change feels so hard. Because when you attempt to become a new version of yourself, you're not just moving forward, you're changing what collapses. You're threatening the existing pattern. Old identities resist this, not because they're evil, but because they've been observed into stability. They're familiar, practiced, reinforced by feedback loops. But familiarity isn't truth. It's just repetition. To break it, you must expand your awareness. Reopen the box. Allow multiple selves to exist without collapsing too quickly. Sit in the discomfort of being in between. Let all the versions breathe. When you do this, something profound happens. You begin to feel whole, not because you've purified your identity, but because you've stopped denying parts of it. You can be the one who failed and still access the one who learned. You can be the one who stayed silent and still activate the one who now speaks. The power is not in choosing once. The power is in realizing you can always choose again. You are not bound by the last version you collapsed into reality. You can shift, realign, update the waveform. You are the quantum chooser. And this means your past no longer defines you. It merely describes one branch. Others remain. Others await. And now that you've accepted the paradox of self, that you are both light and shadow, fear and courage, success and collapse, next we will uncover why so many people forget this. Why we lock into one version and forget we were ever fluid. Why we stop accessing the multiverse of self. And how memory has played a trick so subtle, most never notice it. You've now seen that you contain multitudes, that you are both the path taken and the one refused, that you are not either slash or, you are everything you've observed, and everything you haven't yet dared to. So why does it feel like you can't access all those selves? Why does it feel like you've forgotten them? Because you have, but not by accident. You were trained to forget. Not by a person, not by a single system, but by the architecture of human memory itself. You don't remember who you really are, not because you're flawed, but because the way your mind organizes identity is based on one core principle, narrative compression. Your mind does not store your full range. It edits. It summarizes. It erases contradiction to preserve a stable storyline. Every memory you carry is not a perfect recording. It's a story reconstructed each time you recall it. You remember not what happened, but what made sense at the time you last remembered it. And each recall edits the file again. You are not remembering identity. You are reinforcing the version that got the most airtime. This is not a problem in design. It's a feature. Without this compression, you'd be overwhelmed by possibility every waking second. You wouldn't know how to speak, how to act, how to exist in a society that rewards predictability. But there's a cost to that convenience. The more often you recall one version of yourself, the more real it becomes, and the less access you have to the versions you haven't remembered in a while. They're still there. They're just behind the curtain of narrative. The child in you who once believed they could build worlds. Forgotten, but not deleted. The moment you knew you were capable of radical reinvention, buried under newer, more cautious interpretations. The passion that once defined you, replaced by the practicality that seemed necessary. Still waiting. You don't remember who you really are because you've overwritten the file. Again and again. But the original data hasn't vanished. It's hidden in the subconscious, in dreams, in body memory, in flashes of recognition you can't quite explain. You feel it when a piece of music makes you cry for reasons you can't name. You sense it when an image, a phrase, a smell evokes an emotional response so deep it bypasses logic. That's the original you knocking. Not a better version. Just a different one. One you haven't looked at in a while. Now here's where it gets more precise. The part of your brain responsible for identity coherence, the default mode network, literally filters out versions of yourself that don't match your ongoing story. If you've told yourself for years that you're shy, the bold version of you will not only be ignored by your memory, it will be actively suppressed by your neurology. This is not because that self isn't real. It's because your story has declared it irrelevant. Your identity is filtered reality. That's the trick. You don't remember who you really are because memory, by design, favors cohesion over completeness. So how do you begin to remember? By disrupting the loop. You stop telling the same story. You interrupt the narrative with new input, new context, new environments. You seek experiences that contradict your current identity, not to escape it, but to remind your mind that there are other versions still coded within. The unfamiliar is the doorway to the forgotten. You might not remember being powerful, but your body does. You might not recall a time when you were bold, but your nervous system holds traces of it. You might have forgotten the joy, the rebellion, the wildness, but it hasn't forgotten you. Start there. Start by listening for what feels both strange and familiar. That electric tension between resonance and fear? That's not danger. That's you brushing against a version you buried. Let it speak. It won't speak in words at first. It will come through impulse, curiosity, imagination. This is the beginning of memory reactivation. You are not summoning anything new. You are unfreezing the self. And with every shift in how you speak about yourself, with every new lens you allow, the memory net widens. You start catching fragments of forgotten selves. You start dreaming again, not in fantasy, but in coded recall. It's not a spiritual experience. It's a neurological one. And it means something extraordinary. You are not just the sum of your memories. You are the sum of all that you could remember. Once you stop filtering out the rest, now that you see how memory locks you into one identity, next we will unravel the deeper illusion that makes this trap so convincing. The lie that yourself grows in a straight line. It doesn't. You are not a timeline. You are a web. And some of your most important selves didn't grow forward. They grew sideways. You've begun to see that your memory edits you. That identity is shaped by what you consistently recall, not what actually defines you. But there's a deeper structural illusion at play, and it runs even more silently than memory. It's the illusion of time. Specifically, the illusion that yourself develops in a straight line, from child to adult, insecure to confident, unknown to known. We're taught that growth moves forward, that identity is sequential, that life is a staircase where each version of you replaces the last. But that's not how it really works. Your self doesn't grow linearly. It branches, it forks, it loops. You don't just evolve, you diverge. The person you are today isn't a direct upgrade of the person you were 10 years ago. You're not a software version with bug fixes. You're a collection of branches, each one still active, even if you're not walking them right now. When you made a big decision, took one job over another, said yes when you could have said no, left when you could have stayed, your identity didn't just change. It split. In one reality, you followed that path. In another, you didn't. Both exist. And even if you've never thought of it this way, your psyche has. You can feel the branches. You feel them as restlessness, as nostalgia, as dreams of the road not taken, as irrational anger or sadness when nothing makes sense. You're responding to timelines you didn't choose, but that still echo through your nervous system. You didn't just become who you are. You left behind dozens of other selves to do it. And they didn't vanish. They're waiting, in the background, not haunting you, not judging you, just existing. You think of your life like a book, chapter 1, chapter 2 onward, but it's more like a library, a collection of unfinished books, each waiting for you to pick it up again. And here's the twist. Just because you stopped reading one story doesn't mean that character stopped growing. Inside you, every potential self is still developing. Some faster, some slower, some in suspended animation. You didn't grow out of them. You just shifted focus. Linear identity tells you that who you are now is the result of logical progress. But nonlinear identity reveals the truth, that you're made of coexisting versions, each with its own truth, its own direction, its own fate. This is why identity feels unstable when you're under pressure. The moment your current self struggles, another one offers to take the wheel. Sometimes it feels like regression, sometimes like breakthrough, but either way, it's not random. It's a shift in focus across your internal identity branches. And sometimes, it's exactly what you need. The mistake people make is thinking of this as inconsistency. It's not. It's complexity. The modern self isn't a timeline. It's a constellation. And each time you face a new experience, you activate a new part of that constellation. You might feel drawn to something completely outside your current identity. A new skill, a wild idea, a forgotten dream. That's not distraction. That's resonance with a parallel version of yourself who already knows how to do that. Your job isn't to justify it. Your job is to listen. Because the most accelerated growth doesn't happen by continuing a straight path. It happens by shifting tracks, by stepping sideways into a version of you that's already evolved in a different direction. And once you do this consciously, everything changes. You're no longer limited to your current trajectory. You're free to choose from any available self-state. And that choice, it breaks time, because now you're not just growing forward. You're reconnecting with the nonlinear web of identity that was always there. You stop saying, I've changed. You start saying, I've activated another version. The lie of the linear self collapses, and in its place, a multidimensional identity system emerges. You are not a journey with one path. You are a quantum network, a map of possibilities. Next, we will stop looking outward and begin to trace the dimensions within. Because this multiverse of self, it isn't out there. It's inside your mind. And it's much closer than you think. So far, we've broken down the illusion of the single self, revealed the manipulation of memory, and exposed the myth of linear identity. But if your identity isn't fixed, isn't linear, and isn't entirely remembered, where is it? Where do all those alternate versions of you live? Not in some distant universe. Not in mystical realms, but in the one place you carry everywhere, your mind. Right now, inside your consciousness is a multiverse. And no, this isn't metaphor. This is structure. Your mind holds not one identity, but an entire system of identities, each one shaped by your experiences, your potentials, your projections, and your permissions. Let's make that real. Every time you say, part of me wants this, but another part doesn't, you're not being vague. You're describing simultaneous self-states, distinct operating selves, two or more real identities, each with its own emotional logic, beliefs, memories, and desires, coexisting within you. The multiverse isn't science fiction. It's how the brain works. Your consciousness operates like a stage. At any given moment, one self is holding the mic. That's the version of you you're identifying with. But behind the curtain, a full cast of other selves is waiting. Some ready, some silent, some forgotten. You don't become a new person through effort alone. You activate a dormant self who already knows how to handle this version of life. And when you realize that, the game changes. You're no longer trying to build a personality brick by brick. You're learning to shift the spotlight. Let's get specific. Inside your mind exists the version of you who knows how to speak with clarity. The version who remains calm in conflict. The one who writes. The one who builds. The one who feels joy without guilt. The one who says no without apology. These aren't roles you have to earn. They're configurations of thought, emotion, and focus. And the more you understand how to tune into them, the more fluid your identity becomes. This is why some people transform almost overnight. They didn't grow. They shifted. They made contact with a version of themselves that already had the capacity. And instead of waiting years to become someone new, they accessed what was already inside. So how do you navigate this internal multiverse? Start with attention. What you focus on becomes more accessible. If you habitually focus on the version of you who's tired, anxious, and small, that's the self you activate. But when you focus repeatedly with clarity, On the version of you who feels alive, centered, and creative, you begin to switch tracks. It doesn't happen all at once, but it does happen predictably, because the self is modular. Think of identity like a playlist. You're not changing the whole system. You're changing what's queued up next. And here's the key. Emotion is your tuning fork. You don't access alternate selves through logic. You access them through emotional alignment. Every self in your system carries a specific energetic signature. Some are heavy, some are electric, some feel sharp, others expansive. And your body can feel the difference. When you're stuck in an anxious self, your body tightens, your field contracts. When you access a confident self, your breath deepens, your voice grounds, your energy widens. You're not imagining that. You're perceiving a shift in state. The multiverse inside your mind is not a thought experiment. It's a dynamic field of real neurological and emotional pathways. Some are well-traveled, others are overgrown, but all are there. And when you recognize this, choice becomes exponential. You stop asking, "Can I become that person?" You start asking, "What does it feel like to shift into that version of me right now?" And then you follow the emotion. You mimic the energy. You rehearse the posture, the speech, the thought patterns. Not to fake it, but to tune into it. You're not inventing this self. You're locating it. This is how you stop waiting for transformation and start navigating your own identity multiverse with precision. Now, one question often arises here. If I can access all these versions of me, does that mean I've already lived the choices I never made? The answer might surprise you. Yes. Not in this timeline. Not in this linear stream. But those choices do exist. Those versions do live. And next we will explore the shockingly real truth behind that idea. That the moment you're in right now has already happened. Just not here. You've seen how your mind holds a living multiverse. How different versions of you are not theoretical, but coded into your perception, memory, and emotion. Now take that one step further. Let's talk about experience that hasn't happened here, but still happened. Not in imagination, not in fantasy, in an alternate strand of possibility. The version of you who made the opposite decision, they lived this moment, just in a different configuration of choices. That might sound abstract, but you feel it. Every time you sense that eerie familiarity with a person you just met. Every time you feel grief for something you never technically lost. Every time you catch yourself acting like you've done this before. You're picking up traces, echoes, residue. We call it déjà vu. We call it intuition. But what it really is feedback from other selves, from moments that played out in other tracks, from versions of you who took paths you didn't. This isn't a metaphysical claim. It's a perceptual one. Because if your identity is a cloud of probabilities, and attention collapses experience into form, then it stands to reason. Your focus is only one narrow slice of a much larger whole. And every now and then, something from the edge of your awareness gets through. Not because you asked for it, because the resonance was strong enough to echo across boundaries. You've already lived this moment. Just not here. Not in this timeline, this linearity, this configuration of events. But in another branch, another combination of choices, another activated self, you've been here. So what do you do with that information? You listen, not to the noise of memory, but to the pattern beneath it. Your decisions become more powerful when you realize they're not isolated. They're connected to a field of parallel choices made by versions of you haven't even met in this form. And those versions are not competitors. They're not stories you missed out on. They are resources. The you who succeeded in this situation. They've left clues. The you who failed dramatically also left a warning. The you who stayed, the you who left, the you who tried, the you who froze, every one of them is contributing data to your now. Your instincts are not random. They're compression algorithms of parallel information. That's why you sometimes know more than you should. Why you sense danger before it happens. Why you feel drawn to things that defy logic. Because it already happened. Somewhere, this moment is not new. It's just new to this version of you. And once you realize this, you begin to feel differently about decision-making. is not about creating from scratch. It's about aligning with the strand that serves the outcome you want to stabilize. You can ask, what does the version of me who already knows how to do this feel like? How do they stand? What thoughts do they repeat? What habits did they leave behind? What signals did they follow? That's not imagination. That's communication. You're syncing with your own network. This is how intuitive leaps happen. This is how people change course, not slowly, but dramatically. This is how you bypass years of hesitation. Because the answers aren't waiting in the future. They're happening now, just not here. But now that you're tuning in, that barrier is thinning. And what was once inaccessible becomes usable. You're not just the version of yourself who showed up today. You are the sum total of every possibility you've ever generated. Every life you might have lived. Every choice that could have shaped you. You're not imagining your potential. You're remembering it. Next, we will look at the one faculty that holds this system together. The quiet intelligence that speaks across timelines and carries truth you haven't earned logically. Your intuition. And why it so often feels like a memory. You've begun to sense it. Your decisions, your thoughts, your instincts are not limited to this version of you. They're being influenced by versions who've already lived this moment in some other strand of reality. But what carries that influence? What bridges those timelines? What translates quantum echoes into emotional signals? It's your intuition. And it's not mystical. It's structural. Intuition is a form of internal data compression. It takes experiences from alternate versions of you, experiences you never had in this lifetime, and delivers them in a language your body understands. Sensation, resonance, emotion. This is why intuition often arrives without context. Why it makes no logical sense. Why it feels like remembering something you've never actually experienced. Because in a way you have, just not here. When you suddenly feel unsafe in a perfectly normal situation, it may not be irrational. It might be feedback from a version of you who didn't trust their instinct and paid for it. When you feel an inexplicable draw towards someone you've never met, that feeling might be informed by another version of you who already built something powerful with them. Your intuition isn't pulling from nowhere. It's pulling from parallel reference points. Your job is to learn how to read it. But that's not easy because most of us were taught to ignore intuition. We were trained to privilege logic, deduction, evidence. We were taught that if something couldn't be explained in a straight line, it couldn't be trusted. But that's like trying to navigate a city using only one street. You miss the entire grid. Your intuition is the multi-threaded GPS of your identity multiverse. It doesn't just consider your current memories. It pulls from the echoes of other selves. It compresses experiences from other timelines into actionable emotion. It gives you access to information that is emotionally true, even if it's cognitively out of reach. This is why intuitive people often say, I just know. They're not guessing. They're translating data from alternate selves. But it comes with a catch. The more you ignore it, the quieter it becomes. The more you honor it, the sharper it gets. Because intuition is based on permission. You're not blocked from your other selves. You're just not always listening. And the way to open that channel isn't through effort. It's through trust. You have to let the signal rise before you demand the explanation. That's the mistake most people make. They interrupt intuition by interrogating it. They feel something powerful and immediately try to figure it out. But the moment you do that, you shift out of resonance and back into logic. And logic can't access alternate selves. Only resonance can. So how do you know when it's intuition and not just noise? You start paying attention to the quality of the feeling. Intuition usually feels sudden but calm. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It doesn't loop. It lands. And when you follow it, something in you relaxes, even if it leads to a difficult choice. You're not looking for comfort. You're looking for clarity. You might feel fear on top of it. That's normal. But under the fear, there's a solidity. A click. That's how you know. Now, this isn't about romanticizing instinct. It's about reclaiming a cognitive function that's been marginalized by a culture obsessed with certainty. Intuition is real. It's not soft. It's not vague. It's fast access memory from across your multiversal self system. and it's there to help you make decisions aligned with a broader intelligence than your linear story. Let's be clear. You are not starting from zero every time you face a choice. You are not guessing in the dark. You are not building your future from scratch. You are remembering forward. You're accessing data streams from other versions of you who've already passed through similar crossroads. So when that quiet voice inside says, "This isn't right," when that inexplicable pull says, "Go here instead," when that internal tension says, "Not them, not this, not now," you do well to listen. That's not fear. That's not emotion. That's experience. From a version of you who lived it already. Next, we will translate this knowing into code. Because if intuition is the signal, then identity is the algorithm. And it's time you understood how your many selves run that code. You felt the signal, intuition, coming through from other versions of you. Now we step into the system that translates those signals into form, the algorithm of identity. Because that's what the self is. Not a core truth, not a soul-shaped container, a responsive, evolving algorithm, a set of instructions that update based on input, observation, and emotion. Let's make that clear. Your identity is not who you are. It's how you function, and that function is programmable. You've been running an algorithm your whole life. Started early, built from repetition, reward, fear, attention. Patterns reinforced over time became scripts. Scripts became traits. Traits became identity. But those scripts weren't carved in stone. They were written in a flexible language. Every thought, every feeling, every experience adjusted the code. And now, even if you think your identity is solid, it's still adjusting in the background, waiting for your input to tell it what kind of self to become. You're not fixed. You're running. And your inputs shape your outputs. Let's break that down. If you constantly feed the algorithm thoughts of limitation, fear, and past failure, it will optimize for safety. It will produce behaviors that match the survival pattern. But if you feed it inputs of curiosity, action, and emotional courage, it starts generating a different version of you. One aligned with exploration and growth. You become what your inputs instruct. This is not positive thinking. This is systems design. Just like a neural network gets trained on datasets, your identity gets trained on internal and external data. And most people are running outdated inputs. Old beliefs, old language, old emotional filters. Their algorithm is looping a version of self that no longer fits, but still runs because it's familiar. The breakthrough comes when you realize you can start training your identity differently. You can alter your language. You can shift your attention. You can select new emotional baselines. Each of those is an input. Each one changes the output. And because your self is algorithmic, it doesn't resist change. It just needs consistency. Not force. Not perfection. Just enough repetition to form a new behavioral logic. So here's how it works. When you say, "I'm not that kind of person," your algorithm says, "Got it. Filter out all behaviors that don't match." When you say, "I can learn this," your system goes, "Okay, run learning mode. Open new pathways." You are literally coding yourself every day. And the fastest way to shift your algorithm is by altering what you believe you're allowed to be. Because belief is the compiler. It turns possibility into instruction. And the reason most people stay stuck isn't because they don't want to change. It's because their beliefs are writing faulty code. "I'm always this way. I could never do that. This is just who I am." These aren't truths. They're lines of code with a bug. Change the code and the self updates. So what does this mean practically? It means if you want to shift into another version of you, don't start with behavior. Start with input. Change the way you talk to yourself. Change the stories you tell. Change the emotional filters you apply to new experiences. Every change in input will be read by the system. And if sustained, it rewrites the algorithm. Soon, your thoughts start matching the new story. Your emotions follow. Your habits align. And what was once a distant version of you becomes your default mode. Not because you forced it, because you trained it. You ran the code long enough for the system to update. That's the truth about identity. It's not who you are. It's what you've practiced. Now that you've seen how your identity runs on algorithms of possibility, next we will shift metaphors entirely, from code to interface, because now it's time to learn how to move between yourselves, like switching tabs in a browser, effortlessly. So far, you've learned that identity isn't a single story. It's not who you are, it's what you practice. You've seen that each version of you runs on a modifiable algorithm, shaped by input, belief, and focus. Now we move into a more dynamic metaphor, because your identity doesn't just run like software, it operates like a browser. You are not using one tab at a time. You have many open, constantly. Each identity is a tab loaded with its own script, its own content, its own level of activity. Some are pinned, always running in the background. Some you haven't clicked on in a long time, but they're still open, still affecting your system. And just like a browser, where you place your attention determines which tab is active. When you focus on a specific identity, say, the ambitious self, you're bringing that tab to the front. You can see it. You can engage with it. But the shy self, the anxious self, the playful one, they don't close. They're still live, just behind the scenes. Your mistake isn't in switching between selves. That's normal. That's efficient. The problem is thinking you're only allowed one tab open at a time. That's not how consciousness works. You're multi-threaded. Always have been. Let's go deeper. You might behave one way at work, another way with friends, a third with your family. These aren't masks. They're context-sensitive identity tabs. They load specific scripts based on your environment. But just like a browser, the more tabs you have open without awareness, the more they drain your system. They compete for energy, attention, clarity. This is why you feel overwhelmed when too many identities are running in the background. It's not that you're doing too much. It's that you're doing it unconsciously. You're switching tabs without intention. Here's where conscious identity management begins. Step 1. Become aware of your tabs. Start tracking your shifts. Notice who you're being, not what you're doing, but what kind of self is currently active. How does this self speak? How does it walk, react, think? This awareness gives you access, and access leads to choice. Step 2. Close what no longer needs to run. Not every identity needs to stay open. Some are legacy tabs, old selves you keep revisiting out of habit. The one who learned to survive by shrinking. The one who keeps apologizing. The one who overperforms to earn safety. You don't have to delete these versions. Just stop keeping them active. You're allowed to close a tab. This isn't denial. It's efficiency. Step 3. Start using pinned tabs consciously. Pinned tabs are your foundational selves, the ones you always want accessible. These might include the calm self, the creator, the strategist, the grounded witness. These are the ones you rely on, especially under pressure. If you know your pinned tabs, you always have a fallback. You don't spiral, you switch. And that brings us to the final skill, intentional tab switching. When life demands a new version of you, don't try to become that person from scratch. Just activate the tab. That self already exists. You've used it before. You know its feel. Don't build, shift. The same way you switch to a research tab when you need answers, switch to your confident self when the situation calls for leadership. When you're home and need rest, switch to the nurturing self. You don't need to earn it. You just need to click in. And if the tab isn't open yet, open it. Spend time with that identity. Load its pages. Let it run in the foreground long enough to become familiar. The more you engage with it, the faster it loads next time. This is identity fluency, the ability to access multiple selves without losing coherence. Now let's go even deeper. Some tabs are ghost tabs, identities you opened long ago and forgot about. They still affect your bandwidth. They still slow your system. These are the old wounds, the past roles, the identities frozen in unresolved emotion. You need to check your task manager. Ask, what part of me is still running without my attention? Because energy spent maintaining unnecessary tabs is energy not available for evolution. Identity clarity begins with system clarity. And once you reclaim that clarity, something powerful happens. Your full range becomes available. You're not confused by your complexity. You're skilled in it. You don't have one self. You have a self system. Now ask yourself, which tabs have I never dared to open? The artist you never took seriously? The provocateur you judged too risky? The lover, the monk, the leader, the rebel? They're not fantasies. They're real tabs. You just haven't clicked them yet. Next we will go there. Because while some of your identities are running silently in the background, others are louder. They've spoken before, and they're still alive, waiting for you to listen. You've seen how your mind holds identities like browser tabs, some open, some minimized, some left running so long they start draining your system. But what about the roles you thought you left behind? The ones you outgrew, discarded, walked away from? The ones that used to define you? They didn't vanish. They're still alive. Every role you've ever played is still active in your subconscious. Not as a memory, not as a file in storage, but as a version of self waiting for you to acknowledge it. This includes the obvious ones: the student, the misfit, the overachiever, the romantic, but also the subtler roles: the peacemaker, the observer, the troublemaker, the forgiver. Each of these roles formed around a survival need, a desire, or a moment of expansion. And even if you moved on, that version of you didn't die. It stayed in the system. Here's the important part. Those past selves still influence you. They shape your reflexes, your inner voice, your emotional responses, even if you haven't consciously accessed them in years. Think of them like apps running in the background. You may not be using them, but they're still syncing data. This is why you sometimes react in ways that surprise you. Why a small trigger unlocks a big emotion. Why a compliment makes you feel embarrassed instead of empowered. Why an opportunity makes you shrink when you thought you'd rise. You're not reacting from your current self. You're reacting from an older one that still holds emotion, memory, identity. Until acknowledged, these selves don't fade. They wait, and in waiting, they distort. Here's what that means. A role you've outgrown but never integrated becomes a wound. A self you abandoned without resolution becomes a ghost. And ghosts don't disappear because you forget them. They linger because you haven't let them speak. You don't need to exorcise your past selves. You need to reintroduce yourself. So how do you do that? Start by tracking emotional echoes. When you feel disproportionate emotion in a familiar situation, ask, who's speaking right now? You might be surprised at the answer. You might find that the insecure teen is still driving your decisions, or that the version of you who got hurt in love still flinches at connection, or that the first self who tasted ambition still expects the world to punish them for wanting more. These roles aren't enemies. They're messengers. They don't want control. They want recognition. Give it. Speak to them. Revisit them. Let them know you've changed. Let them know they can rest. Integration isn't about going back. It's about taking the pieces with you. Here's where this gets profound. Some of those roles still carry power you need. That old performer, they knew how to command attention. That misfit, they saw the system more clearly than anyone. That loner, they built self-sufficiency you now depend on. You don't need to bury them. You need to reactivate the parts that serve you and retire the ones that no longer do. It's not about erasing. It's about editing. Let the ghost selves speak. Let them give you their data. Then update their function. Fold their wisdom into your current identity. When you do this, the system stabilizes. You stop reacting from outdated programs. You gain range. You gain inner trust. You're not haunted by old versions of you anymore. You're accompanied by them. You become a coalition, not a contradiction. Next, we will go deeper into this, because some versions of you didn't just stay alive in memory. They refused to die at all. They're not ghosts. They're rebels. They're waiting for their turn, and they still believe they have something to do. You've revisited your past roles. You've begun to see them not as discarded identities, but as living facets of your psyche. You've recognized that none of them ever truly vanished. They linger, they echo, but some of them go beyond that. Some of them refuse to disappear. They're not just inactive roles. They're fully intact versions of you, preserved with stunning clarity, trapped in emotional amber, waiting for permission to return. These are the selves that never died. The artist who got buried under practicality. The rebel who was punished into silence. The dreamer who gave up after the first failure. The lover who shut down after heartbreak. You think these selves are gone, but they're not. They're still here, not in memory, in resistance. You feel them every time your current identity feels incomplete. Every time you hesitate, not because you're confused, but because something deeper is pushing back. Every time you feel like part of you is missing. You're not imagining that. You're hearing the echo of a self that never finished its arc. Let's be clear. This isn't about nostalgia. It's not about trying to go back to who you used to be. It's about understanding that identity doesn't follow a single thread. It branches, and some branches never got the chance to bloom. Those versions didn't fail. They were interrupted by fear, by timing, by someone else's voice, by a single moment where belief broke and you stepped off that track. But the self didn't disappear. It waited, and it's still here in your system, fully formed, filled with the energy of everything it never got to express. This is why so many people feel stuck. Not because they lack clarity, but because part of their identity system is frozen, blocked by an unresolved self who is still holding the charge of an unfinished becoming. Let's break that down. When you suppress a part of you, you're not deleting it. You're holding it in stasis. That version of you continues to exert pressure on your thoughts, your choices, your emotions. But because it has no outlet, it turns inward. That pressure becomes anxiety, restlessness, sudden bursts of energy that you can't explain, rage that feels disproportionate, sadness that shows up without a story. It's not dysfunction. It's backlog, unlived identity trying to re-enter consciousness. And unless you make space for it, it will keep knocking. Not gently, louder, until you pay attention. So how do you do that? How do you engage with the version of you that never died? You start by asking, what part of me is still waiting for its turn? You'll know when you found it because your body will react. Your chest might tighten. Your jaw might clench. Your eyes might sting. That's not resistance. That's recognition. Next, stop demanding justification. Don't ask, why does this still matter? Ask, what did this version of me want to do? It's probably simple. To speak, to be seen, to create without fear, to love without strategy, to risk without apology. Let that self speak. Don't interrupt. Don't analyze. Just listen. Give it 10 minutes a day. Write from its voice. Move like it. Dress like it. Give it a song, a color, a name. You're not going back to who you were. You're pulling forward what was never given a chance to integrate. This isn't regression. It's completion. And the moment that version feels seen, something changes. The energy trapped in that identity releases. You regain emotional bandwidth. You recover enthusiasm. You unlock power. Because the self you thought was dead, it was carrying a part of your essence that no other version could replicate. You don't need to become that self fully. You just need to harvest what it held. Let the rebel fuel your courage. Let the artist restore your imagination. Let the lover soften your armor. Every version you reconnect with increases your range. You're not more complicated. You're more complete. Now you're no longer afraid of who you were. You're in conversation with it. You're in collaboration. Next, we will explore a deeper level of this collaboration. The parts of you that never stopped speaking. Only they didn't speak in memory. They spoke in something else. Fear. Now that you've recognized the selves that never died, a new question arises. Why do they keep showing up as tension, as discomfort, as fear? Because fear isn't always a warning about what's outside. Often it's a message from the inside, from a version of you trying to get your attention. Every fear you experience contains a self that's trying to speak. Let that land. Fear is often dismissed as a signal of weakness, of irrationality, of something to conquer or control. But what if it's actually a signal of identity misalignment? Not danger, but disconnection. When you fear being seen, it may be the suppressed performer inside you saying, I'm still here, and I want my moment. When you fear commitment, it might be the abandoned lover saying, "Don't repeat the silence again." When you fear success, it's often the visionary in you asking, "Are you really ready to carry me this time?" You don't fear the unknown. You fear activating a version of yourself you've been avoiding. Because once you activate it, everything changes. Your comfort zone collapses. Your current self has to make room. And that's terrifying. Not because it's wrong, because it's real. So how do you decode fear? You stop asking what you're afraid of. You start asking, who in me is trying to speak? Every fear has a voice. Not the surface panic, but the deeper frequency. If you sit with the fear long enough, not fight it, not fix it, it will reveal whose voice it carries. Sometimes it's a child. Sometimes it's a version of you who took a hit and never recovered. Sometimes it's the one who tried something big and failed. Their fear isn't irrational. It's informed. They remember. They lived the timeline you didn't finish. So give them space to tell you what they know. Ask, what happened to you? What are you trying to protect me from? What do you need me to know now? This isn't passive reflection. It's direct communication. You're not just managing fear. You're interviewing it. And often the fear starts to soften. Not because the risk is gone, but because the self who carried it has finally been heard. And when that happens, something extraordinary follows. The fear transforms into fuel. That anxious energy becomes alertness. That tightness becomes focus. That hesitation becomes discernment. Because fear, when understood, becomes strategy. You're not working against yourself anymore. You're working with a fuller team. You begin to realize, fear was never your enemy. It was the voice of your exiled selves. Each one holding a truth you needed, but weren't ready to hear. And now, you are. So next time fear rises, don't run. Pause. Ask who's speaking. Listen fully. Thank them. Then ask them to walk with you. Not as resistance, but as guidance. Next, we will discover what happens when you honor those messages and begin shifting yourself. Not after a lifetime, but within one. Because transformation doesn't require death. Just access. You've listened to the fears. You've met the voices inside them. You've begun to realize they were never trying to stop you. They were trying to prepare you, to be heard, to be brought with you. But now you're at a crossroads. The insight is no longer enough. You've seen your alternate selves. You've felt their presence in memory, in emotion, in fear. Now comes the decision. Do you stay where you are or shift? Not gradually, not theoretically, but consciously. This is what we call Selveshift. Not metaphorical rebirth. Not dramatic reinvention. Selveshift is the practical science of identity transition within a single lifetime. Most people think of change as something slow, earned, and often forced by crisis. But that's only because they're relying on external forces to do the work for them. Waiting for loss, waiting for pain, waiting for breakdown. You don't need to wait. You can change who you are without needing to destroy the life around you. That's reincarnation without dying. And it begins not with force, but with precision. Selveshift starts when you stop treating your identity like a fact and start treating it like a current configuration, a setup, a temporary loadout, a way of being that runs until you decide to change the code. Let's get technical. Your nervous system operates like a predictive engine. It runs habitual responses based on repeated inputs. Every time you respond to stress with avoidance, that pattern gets reinforced. Every time you stay quiet to keep the peace, that version of you gets stronger. But here's the key. Your brain is not loyal to your past. It's loyal to whatever you repeat, which means you don't have to kill the old self. You just need to outpractice it. The more time and attention you give to a new pattern, the faster your system rewires. So how do you begin? Step 1. Select the new self. Not vaguely, with specificity. You must articulate who you're shifting into, not just what they do, but how they perceive. Ask, how does this version of me interpret discomfort? What does this self prioritize without hesitation? What thoughts are automatic for them? What habits are irrelevant? This isn't fantasy. It's self-mapping. You're identifying the architecture of the self you want to inhabit, so your system knows what to recreate. Step 2. Embody in small windows. You don't need to sustain the shift all day. You just need proof. 10 minutes of living as the new identity builds more neural weight than hours of intellectualizing it. Make a call as that version. Write as that version. Say no, say yes, say nothing as that version. This is the rewiring moment. The point where your nervous system says, "Oh, we're doing this now." Step 3. Anchor with ritual. Selveshift accelerates when tied to repeated triggers. Something sensory, something simple, a specific song, a scent, a phrase, a color, a breath, something that says, "We are no longer running the old program." Don't underestimate this. The mind loves association. It creates safety inside new patterns when they feel familiar. You're not faking it. You're stabilizing. Step 4. Track resistance. Every time you shift, an old self will resist. That's not sabotage. That's momentum. That's the nervous system asking, "Are we sure we're safe doing this?" Answer it. Calmly. Clearly. Don't collapse. Don't argue. Just hold the new self steady. And each time you don't flinch, you gain trust. Step 5. Reconfigure relationships. Selveshift becomes real when other people confirm it. This doesn't mean you wait for approval. It means you notice which environments reinforce the old identity and which support the new one. Change your inputs, or change your interactions within them. You don't owe consistency to anyone but your evolution. Step 6. Pause for stabilization. Once you've shifted, hold. Don't rush to the next goal. Let the new self breathe. Let the body feel what it's like to exist without the tension of internal conflict. Stabilization isn't stagnation. It's assimilation. This is where most people sabotage the shift. They expect immediate transformation, get overwhelmed by contrast, and then retreat to what's familiar. Don't rush the leap. Respect the reboot. You've reincarnated not metaphysically but neurologically. You've become a new operating self. Not better, just aligned. And from here, everything changes. You don't just feel different. You respond differently. You process differently. You interpret, create, move, choose differently. You've stepped onto a new timeline inside the same body. That's Selveshift. Next, we will move from practice to power. You've chosen the self. Now it's time to leap into it, fully, decisively, as an act of quantum authorship. Because the next version of you isn't waiting to be discovered. It's waiting to be chosen. You've selected the self. You've felt the nervous system begin to rewire. You've taken steps, small windows, focused actions, anchors. Now we take the leap. This is where Selveshift becomes quantum. Not theoretical, not gradual, but immediate. The identity jump is the moment you stop rehearsing the new self and begin living from it. It's not a phase, it's a switch. And the only requirement is full commitment. Let's be clear, you're not building a persona. You're transferring consciousness. You're choosing to run a different self-system. And the moment you do, the reality around you adjusts accordingly. This is how quantum shift works. Because your world isn't responding to who you are. It's responding to who you act from. Your choices emit frequency. And the moment you shift the signal, you shift the response field. So how do you know you've made the jump? There's a distinct sensation. Subtle but unmistakable. It feels like friction disappears. Like hesitation falls away. Like your internal monologue changes languages. Like you've entered a flow where your previous doubts don't apply anymore. You didn't just imagine a new you. You became it. And the difference shows up everywhere. In how you move. How you say no. How you speak when nobody's watching. How you return to silence. How you enter rooms. Your energy tells a different story now. But there's something else. With every identity jump, there's loss. Not pain, but release. You shed habits that defined you for years. You stop seeking the validation that your old self needed to survive. You realize people who knew you one way may struggle to recognize this new frequency. Let them. Your jump isn't for their comfort. It's for your coherence. And coherence is how reality locks onto your new identity. Because when your energy, language, posture, behavior, and belief align, you become magnetic. Not in some esoteric sense. In the practical way that people, opportunities, and synchronicities begin to reorganize around the self you're now broadcasting. Let's ground this further. The identity jump is only sustainable if you protect it in its early phase. That means boundaries, not from others, from old self patterns. Your former self will whisper, not out of malice but from momentum. You'll feel the urge to check back in with old habits. You'll want to explain yourself to people who preferred the earlier version. You'll second-guess when things feel unfamiliar. Don't indulge the echo. The past doesn't need closure. It needs release. Every time you resist the temptation to prove yourself to your old life, the new one strengthens. And something else will happen. You'll begin to see choices that were invisible before. Paths, conversations, possibilities. They weren't hidden. You just weren't tuned to the version of you who could recognize them. Now that you are, the landscape updates. This is the real reason the identity jump feels magical to some. It's not magic. It's perception shift. What was once impossible now feels obvious. What was once scary now feels necessary. What was once just not you now feels inevitable. Because it is. You were always capable of being this version. You just hadn't jumped. Now that you have, you don't look back. Because looking back invites collapse. Not because the old self is evil, because it's obsolete. Let it fade. There will come a moment, days or weeks after the jump, when you realize you haven't thought like your old self in a while. And when you try to, it feels awkward, forced, like trying to speak a language you no longer believe in. That's not arrogance. That's progress. You don't need to justify the shift. You need to maintain it. And maintenance doesn't mean strain. It means alignment. Small daily calibrations. Habits that support the current identity. Thoughts that serve this frequency. Environments that nourish it. People who reflect it. And silence. Silence is essential. Because that's where the new self integrates, not in noise, but in space. In stillness. In the quiet rebuilding of your internal framework around the new standard. You've shifted. And with that shift, you've changed not just who you are, but what's possible now. Next, we will explore something strange that happens after a successful jump. The performance becomes the person, and pretending stops being fake. You've made the jump. You've shifted from one identity to another, not just as an experiment, but as a conscious act. You've updated your internal system, tuned into a different frequency, and seen how reality begins to respond. But something else begins to happen. Subtle at first, easy to miss. It feels like something's clicking into place. You start saying things you never said before, but they feel natural. You react in ways you used to practice, but now you do them without thinking. You speak truths that once felt foreign, but now come out like instinct. And then it hits you. What you were pretending has become real. You didn't just perform a new identity. You became it. Let's break this down. Most people misunderstand performance. They assume pretending is fake, is fraud, is imposter energy. But that's not true. Pretending is rehearsal. And rehearsal is how humans evolve. It's how children learn language. It's how adults build confidence. It's how the brain maps new behavior. The key is repetition with belief. When you act as if you are already the version of yourself you're stepping into, and you do it long enough, your nervous system adapts. It reorganizes your responses around that version. It stabilizes the pattern. Your body doesn't wait for truth to behave. It follows the script it's given most consistently. And the more you embody that version of you, the less it feels like an act, and the more it feels like memory. That's the bridge. You're no longer becoming. You're remembering forward. You're practicing a reality that hasn't happened yet. And in doing so, you bring it into form. This is why pretending, when done consciously, becomes one of the most powerful tools of Selveshift. Because it bypasses internal debate. You're not trying to convince yourself. You're just acting from a version that already believes. And eventually, the gap closes. Let's get clear. There's no such thing as fake it till you make it. That phrase implies you're lying your way into alignment. You're not. You're practicing your way into truth. And here's the beautiful part, your brain doesn't resist this. It welcomes it, because it craves coherence. And when your behavior, posture, voice, and thoughts start lining up, even artificially, your identity begins to update automatically. It asks, "Are we this now?" You answer with repetition, and the answer becomes yes. This is how new confidence is built. This is how imposter syndrome fades, not because you eliminate doubt, but because you normalize new behaviors until they belong to you. You don't wait to feel ready. You train until readiness is irrelevant. Let's go deeper. Every identity is a story told through action. You act, you observe the result, and your brain says, "This must be who we are now." It doesn't wait for evidence from your past. It takes evidence from your present behavior. That's why performance works. Because when you behave as the version of you who already owns the room, or speaks clearly, or creates boldly, you generate the evidence your nervous system needs to rewrite your self-perception. This is not delusion. It's deliberate neuroplasticity. You are teaching yourself who you are through action. And that means you don't need to believe in yourself before you act. You need to act long enough for belief to catch up. Let that free you, because belief is often the last thing to arrive. Action leads. Identity follows. There's a moment during the identity jump where the old you tries to interrupt. Who do you think you are? It's loud. It's sharp. And it usually shows up when the new self is just beginning to take hold. That voice isn't trying to destroy you. It's a pattern checking for consistency. It's your system asking, "Do we really mean this?" And the only answer it trusts is action. So you act, again and again, until the old voice gets tired, until the new self is louder, until pretending is no longer pretending. And then one day you realize this isn't performance anymore. This is just you. Not because you were faking it, but because you rehearsed yourself into a new truth. You shifted. You stabilized. You rewrote the story. But here's the twist. The ability to perform isn't just a tool for identity change. It's a doorway, because if pretending becomes reality, then imagination isn't play. It's access. Next, we will unlock that door and step into the inner theater where your most powerful identities are waiting. You've practiced new behavior. You've watched performance solidify into identity. You've trained your system to update its story based on action, not memory. Now it's time to access the raw material behind all that change. The source of every possible version of you. The laboratory where all selves are born. Your imagination, but not as a playground. Not as a daydreaming tool, as a portal. Imagination is not escape. It's not indulgence. It's not optional. It's the mechanism through which you connect to parallel identities, unlived lives, and the frequency signatures of selves you haven't yet stabilized. It's not fiction. It's not fantasy. It's infrastructure. Every time you imagine yourself doing something bold, beautiful, unexpected, your nervous system doesn't say, "This is fake." It says, "This is possible." That's the key. Imagination isn't passive. It's preparatory. It's the rehearsal hall for reality. Let's go deeper. When you visualize a version of yourself, giving a speech, walking away, launching a project, loving differently, you're not just entertaining an idea. You are activating that self. You're feeding it energy, tension, practice, and your body reacts. Your heart rate might shift. Your posture adjusts. Emotions begin to align. Why? Because imagination isn't bound by time or truth. It generates present moment physiology, which means it's one of the fastest ways to change your emotional state. You don't need proof to change how you feel. You need access to a self that feels differently, and imagination is the access point. This is why elite athletes use visualization. Why great performers rehearse mentally before ever stepping on stage. Why meditators see vivid selves in altered states before grounding them in the world. They're not fantasizing. They're prepping frequency. And so can you. Let's make this practical. Choose a version of yourself you want to embody. Not as a fantasy, but as a felt experience. Close your eyes. Step into their world. See what they see. Think how they think. Feel what they feel. Move how they move. Do this long enough and you'll feel a shift. Not in thought, in identity. That's when imagination stops being abstract. It becomes muscle memory, because your nervous system doesn't distinguish between imagined experience and lived experience. Tracks repetition, not reality. And the more often you imagine the new self, the faster it integrates. But most people misuse imagination. They use it to worry, to replay past failure, to forecast disaster. And their system responds by reinforcing a fearful self. It's not imagination that's the problem. It's how you aim it. You must reclaim it, because it's not just your creative tool. It's your identity factory. It's the first version of reality before reality catches up. And when used with intention, it becomes the fastest portal to the version of you you want to stabilize. Let this reframe your practice. Stop asking, what's real right now? Start asking, what's accessible through imagination right now? Then practice it. Feed it. Return to it. Not for escape, but for integration. Imagination isn't something you outgrow. It's something you return to once you realize that every self you've ever needed has already been built, waiting in the mental space you've called fantasy for too long. Now that you've seen imagination for what it really is, next we will map the deep structure behind your imagined selves. Not just stories, but blueprints, ancient, recurring, multiversal patterns of identity, known as archetypes. You've reclaimed imagination not as a distraction, but as a portal. You've learned how to use it to access different versions of yourself, to rehearse identity in a way your nervous system believes. But the question now becomes, where do these versions come from? Are they purely personal? Are they all made up from your life alone? No, there's something deeper, something older. Because beyond your personality, beyond your culture, beyond your specific memories, there are structures, patterns, templates. You didn't invent them. You're channeling them. These are archetypes, not literary characters, not abstract themes, but primal, multiversal blueprints designed to express a type of self that transcends time and language. The hero, the lover, the sage, the rebel, the ruler, the healer, the creator. These aren't roles you act. They're identities that live inside you, waiting to be accessed, awakened, embodied. Every archetype is a doorway, and every doorway leads to a version of you that has always existed. Even if you've never used it, let's get specific. When you feel the urge to step into leadership, not for power, but for responsibility, you're touching the ruler. When you feel called to create, not for validation, but for transmission, you're awakening the creator. When you know something you can't explain, and that knowing feels ancient, you've activated the sage. These aren't random. They're real energetic codes. They've been mapped across cultures for millennia. And here's the wild part. They show up in you even if you've never studied them. Because they're not intellectual, they're archetypal. They're part of your internal operating system. Each time you imagined a version of yourself that felt timeless, larger than life, strangely familiar, you weren't making it up. You were remembering. Archetypes are memory across lifetimes, cultures, timelines. They're collective echoes that offer structure to your personal expansion. You're not meant to invent who you are from scratch. You're meant to assemble your identity using the archetypes that match your current phase. They give you language for what you already feel. They give you direction when your current identity feels too small. They offer a container so you don't drown in possibility. But here's the mistake most people make. They try to be original instead of true. They try to be unique when they should be aligned. Archetypes aren't cliches. They're energetic architecture. You don't lose individuality by using them. You gain clarity. Because when you step into an archetype, you're stepping into a refined frequency. One that has existed for generations and survived because it works. Let's go further. You can feel when an archetype is active in you. You speak differently. You move with more coherence. You know what to say without knowing why. That's not performance. That's embodiment. The moment you stop resisting the structure, the energy flows through you. You're not pretending to be powerful. You're wearing the pattern that holds your power. You're not manufacturing insight. You're stepping into the sage and letting it speak. You're not manipulating people. You're awakening the magician who knows how energy moves. And here's where the quantum part comes in. Each archetype exists as a frequency. And like a radio station, you can tune into it. You don't need to wait to become worthy of the lover, the warrior, the visionary. You access their codes through focus, feeling, and rehearsal. Let the archetype show you how to act. Let the structure shape the self. You don't lose yourself in this process. You meet yourself, because the archetypes are not outside of you. They are you refined, simplified, unapologetically expressed. This is why stories matter. Myth matters. Symbols matter, because they carry the keys to identities you've forgotten how to hold. And when you hold them again, everything sharpens. You speak with precision. You choose with confidence. You feel like you've come home to a part of yourself you didn't know had a name. That's the power of archetype. That's the power of blueprint. But there's one archetype you avoid. The one you deny. The one you're afraid to look at. And yet, it may be the most important one of all. Because you can't be whole until you confront the self you most fear becoming. Next, we will face that mirror. Because your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your twin. You've aligned with archetypes. You've felt the energy of ancient roles running through your modern self. You've stood in the power of these timeless patterns and let them refine your identity. But one part remains untouched. The part that doesn't want to be seen. The version of you that you pretend doesn't exist. The one you silence, reject, ridicule, fear. This is the shadow self. And it's not broken. It's not evil. It's not your flaw. It's your unintegrated power. Let's be clear. Your shadow self is not your weakness. It's your potential. Unmet, unloved, and distorted by avoidance. Every time you've said, I would never do that. Every time you've judged someone and felt a strange sting. Every time you've felt shame without explanation. That's the shadow knocking. It holds the energy of everything you've exiled from your identity. Anger, desire, greed, dominance, chaos. Not because those energies are wrong, but because you never learned how to hold them cleanly. So instead of integrating them, you cast them out. And here's the problem. What you exile doesn't disappear. It grows teeth in the dark. Unmet power becomes sabotage. Unseen parts become projection. Unacknowledged energy turns inward and starts cutting. This is why you sabotage at the edge of success. Why you get small right before you're about to expand. Why certain people trigger you without mercy. They're not enemies. They're mirrors reflecting the parts of you you've disowned. That's the shadow's role. To show you what you're not ready to admit you are. But once you see it, you can choose to reclaim it. Let's go deeper. The shadow self isn't random. It's shaped by early rejection. The first time you were punished for being loud. The moment you were shamed for being ambitious. The time you were called selfish, angry, arrogant. You learned to survive by shrinking. And every time you did that, a part of your power got buried. But now, survival isn't the goal. Wholeness is. And wholeness demands you bring the shadow home. How? Start by tracking your triggers. What traits in others provoke a visceral reaction? Who do you judge instantly, irrationally? What qualities do you avoid showing, even to yourself? These are your clues. Because the shadow isn't subtle. It's loud, chaotic, and clever. But once you listen, it quiets down. Speak to it. Let it respond. Ask it. What do you want from me? What do you protect? What do you know that I don't? And listen, not for drama, but for honesty. The shadow self doesn't want control. It wants collaboration. It wants to stop being the enemy and start being the guardian. Because hidden in your shadow is your rawest energy. Unfiltered intuition. Unpolished courage. Uncompromising truth. And when integrated, it becomes your deepest form of clarity. You stop second-guessing. You stop performing. You stop apologizing for existing. You move as someone who has seen their darkest mirror. And no longer flinches. That's when people start noticing. Not because you're louder, but because you're grounded. Whole. Unshakable. You no longer chase validation. You carry sovereignty. That's the gift of shadow work. Not purity. Power. Next, we will take that power and do something most people never realize is possible. We collapse the false polarity. We stop choosing between light and dark, and we become whole. You've stared into the shadow. You've heard its voice not as an enemy, but as a version of you that never stopped trying to protect you. Not with kindness, but with power. Not with words, but with presence. Now comes the moment everything changes. It's time to collapse the polarity, the false split, the illusion that says, this is the good part of me, and that is the bad. This is the self I show, and that is the self I must suppress. Polarity is a survival mechanism, creates clean categories. It helps the nervous system manage complexity, but it comes at a cost. It fragments you, it splits your energy, traps you in roles that no longer fit. You cannot become whole while fighting half of yourself. You can't grow while labeling entire dimensions of your being as dangerous. You can't expand while pretending some emotions are noble and others are shameful. The version of you who is always calm is not superior to the one who is furious. The version who forgives is not holier than the one who says enough. The truth is this: wholeness is not about choosing between yourselves. It's about letting them take turns with clarity. Let's go deeper. Most people try to heal by reinforcing one polarity, usually the light. They affirm, reframe, visualize. They speak only in love and light. They reject the darker emotions, thinking they're rising above. But you cannot rise by cutting off your roots. Every emotion you suppress becomes a backlog in your system. Every truth you avoid turns into a wall between you and your next self. And every part of you labeled not spiritual, not evolved, or too much turns into shadow energy, demanding your attention in louder and louder ways. You're not meant to suppress. You're meant to integrate. Integration doesn't mean blending everything into gray. It means allowing contradiction to coexist. It means giving space to paradox. You are generous and selfish. You are loyal and detached. You are soft and ruthless. Not because you're confused, because you are complete. Here's how this works in practice. Next time you feel triggered, instead of asking, how do I shift this? Ask, what part of me needs to be included right now? When you feel small, ask what version of you knows how to claim space. When you feel rage, ask what truth wants to be spoken. When you feel numb, ask what emotion is waiting beneath the freeze. Polarity collapses the moment you stop resisting what arises, because that resistance is the polarity. You create tension when you say, this feeling is wrong, this reaction is immature, this impulse is too much. But when you witness the feeling, include the self, and allow the pattern to complete, you restore the circuit. You move from fragmentation to flow. This is where wholeness lives. Not in perfection, but in permission. The permission to be all of it, without shame. You stop labeling your emotions as evidence of brokenness. You start seeing them as information. The anxious part isn't flawed, it's fast. The angry part isn't dangerous. It's protective. The withdrawn part isn't cold. It's recovering. When you let each self have its say, something amazing happens. The internal war stops. The energy you spent suppressing becomes available. And your system begins to synchronize. That's the feeling most people describe as coming home to myself. It's not mystical. It's mechanical. It's what happens when the parts stop fighting. You don't have to pick a side. You just have to stop pretending you only have one. The mature self doesn't silence the angry one. It listens. The spiritual self doesn't override the sensual one. It dances with it. The confident self doesn't ignore the timid one. It offers a hand. That's the model of true integration. Not dominance. Dialogue. You're not aiming for harmony by subtraction. You're conducting a symphony, and every voice gets a seat in the orchestra. Here's the paradox. Once you stop trying to be good, you actually start becoming more grounded, more conscious, more available to life. Because you're no longer splitting your signal. You're no longer trying to keep one half of yourself out of the room. You walk in whole. That's the version of you that feels magnetic. Not because they're perfect, but because they're unfragmented. Polarity collapse leads to energetic coherence, and coherence leads to power, not force, presence. You've come this far by shifting identities. Now you're no longer shifting away from pain, you're including it. You're no longer running from fear, you're decoding it. You're no longer trying to fix yourself. You're learning to wield yourself. Next, we will translate that shift into energy. Because your identity is no longer just behavior, it's frequency. And frequency is how you change reality without saying a word. You've stopped choosing sides. You've invited all versions of yourself to the table. You've learned that integration isn't about being nice, it's about being whole. Now we step into the energetic truth behind identity. You are not just psychological. You are vibrational. Your personality isn't just a set of traits. It's a frequency pattern, a rhythm your thoughts, emotions, and presence emit, moment by moment. Let's break that down. Every thought has a tone. Every emotion has a pulse. Every action has an energetic signature. Together, they form your current broadcast. And that broadcast is what people feel when you enter a room before you speak. It's what determines how life responds to you, who you attract, what opportunities show up, and which realities feel possible. This is not mysticism. It's physics. Everything vibrates, including you. So if identity is vibration, then personality is a frequency field that either contracts or expands, based on what version of you is active. This explains why you can say all the right things and still not be believed. Because people don't respond to your words. They respond to your signal. If you're trying to appear confident while broadcasting self-doubt, the field doesn't lie. And you feel it too. You've met people who speak very little but command attention. You've met others who try to dominate with volume but feel hollow. That's not charisma. That's vibration. Let's take it further. When you access a new self, not through force but through alignment, you change your energetic frequency. You shift your tone, your presence, your gravitational field. And life responds differently. This is why personal growth isn't just about changing what you do. It's about changing who is doing it. A confident self can say, "I don't know," and still lead the room. A grounded self can set boundaries without creating conflict. A fully integrated self can change the mood of a space just by being there. You've seen this before. Now you understand why. Because identity is not just visible, it's transmissible. You're not just living yourself, you're broadcasting it. Here's the practical shift. Stop asking, "What should I say?" or "How should I act?" Start asking, "What am I emitting right now? What frequency am I holding? What signal does my presence carry?" This is the difference between performance and fieldwork. Performance changes how you appear. Fieldwork changes how reality responds. You don't have to manipulate outcomes. You tune your field and the outcomes tune themselves. Let's make it even simpler. Every self you've ever been emits a different frequency. The anxious self is fast, erratic, fragmented. The confident self is slow, centered, rhythmic. The wounded self is defensive and sharp. The integrated self is resonant and soft. When you tune into a specific identity, you inherit its vibration. And when you stabilize that vibration, you become predictable to the universe. Not predictable in action, predictable in resonance. Reality knows how to match you. People know how to feel you. You know how to move without second-guessing. That's what people call being in flow. It's not mystical. It's vibrational alignment. Now, how do you apply this? Start by choosing your base frequency. What emotion, thought, and posture combination feels most true to the self you want to live from? Then practice holding that frequency, not just when things are going well, but when pressure hits. This is the test. Can you hold your signal under stress? Because the self that can do that isn't a costume. It's your new default frequency. And once that's set, you no longer have to try. You become the field. You don't push. You attract. You don't chase. You align. And everything accelerates. Next, we will explore what happens when you intentionally tune into another version of you, not just emotionally, but energetically, because now you know what you are: a broadcaster, a transmitter, a signal with a shape. Next, will teach you how to tune the dial. You've felt it. You've lived it. You now understand that identity is frequency, transmitted, received, and reflected back by the field you occupy. Now we go from understanding to command, because if the self is vibration, and vibration is tunable, then a radical truth emerges. You can consciously tune into any version of yourself that exists in the quantum field. Not hypothetically, not poetically, practically. Right now, there are other versions of you running in parallel. Some in memory, some in imagination, some in unused potential. They aren't fiction. They're dormant possibilities. And the moment you align your frequency with theirs, they activate. This isn't spiritual fantasy. It's energetic congruence. Let's make it clear. Every version of you has its own signature. A mix of thought patterns, emotional baseline, posture, breath, and pace. These 5 elements form a kind of identity key. When you replicate that key, you unlock that self. This isn't wishful thinking. It's field synchronization. So the question is, how do you tune into an alternate you on command? Start here. Step 1. Identify the self you want to access. Be specific. The confident me is vague. Try. The version who speaks calmly when challenged. The one who creates prolifically without second-guessing. The one who doesn't chase but magnetizes. Don't think in generalities. Think in frequency snapshots. Each version is a system. Name the system you want. Step 2. Close the sensory gap. Every self has a sensory texture. What does this version of you sound like when they speak? What rhythm do they walk with? What does their emotional baseline feel like in your chest, your hands, your stomach? Your nervous system doesn't follow language. It follows sensation. So your job is to feel the signature of the self before trying to act from it. This is how alignment begins, not from thought, but from embodiment. Step 3. Enter their space. Visualize not loosely, but structurally. See the environment that version of you lives in. What's their morning like? What do they read? How do they breathe when no one's around? Let your mind give you the room, the movement, the voice of that self. You're not just seeing, you're syncing. Step 4. Speak as that self aloud. This step is non-negotiable. Speaking locks in frequency faster than thinking. Say what this version of you believes, out loud, even if it feels odd at first. Not affirmations, declarations. Say, I don't chase because I am the gravity. I don't perform, I transmit. I don't fear resistance. I calibrate through it. You're not lying. You're broadcasting from a frequency that already exists and activating the neurology to support it. Step 5. Act accordingly. Now choose one behavior that matches this version of you, but doesn't match your current self. This creates energetic tension, which is necessary for stabilization. The old self will try to pull you back. That's your cue that you've actually tuned into something new. Sustain it. Don't flinch. Hold the new field long enough for your external world to update. Because it will. Once you've tuned into a version of yourself and embodied it through thought, feeling, voice, and behavior, your field changes. And when the field changes, reality reorients around the new signal. People treat you differently. You get ideas that weren't available before. The decisions that once paralyzed you become obvious. Not because reality changed, because you tuned your receiver to a frequency where those outcomes already existed. Now you're not chasing possibilities. You're aligning with them. Let's get personal. You've already felt glimpses of this. Moments when you suddenly felt brave. Moments when clarity struck without effort. Moments when you acted like a future version of yourself and it worked. That wasn't random. That was a flash of alignment. Now you're doing it on purpose. Because this isn't about motivation. It's about access. You're not trying to improve. You're tuning into the version of you who has already transcended the problem you're facing. And if you really listen, you'll realize something even more powerful. That version of you is already reaching back. Next, we'll meet them. And they won't just inspire you. They'll mentor you. Right now, you've tuned into alternate versions of yourself. You've felt the power of frequency access, the clarity of embodiment, the edge where energy becomes identity. Now it's time to meet the version of you who already made it. Not in theory, not in visualization, but in real energetic conversation. This is the version of you who solved what you're currently stuck in, who already stepped through the fog you're still walking through, who holds the map, not in words, but in frequency. They're not a fantasy. They're a source. Let's call them the future self, but not as projection, as presence. Here's the shift. Most people think of their future self as something to earn, something that arrives after success, discipline, or time. But that's backward. The future self isn't waiting for you to reach it. It's already broadcasting. You're the one who has to tune in. And when you do, something strange happens. You don't feel hope. You feel recognition. Because the version of you who made it doesn't speak to your goals. They speak to your essence. The part of you that never changed. The part that has always known. Let's access them now. Step 1. Locate them in time. Not vaguely. Place them somewhere real. 2 years from now? 10 months? A few timelines away? Name it. Trust it. Don't ask if it's accurate. Let your system show you where they live. Step 2. Ask a question. Don't be polite. Be precise. Ask what you really want to know. Not generalities, specific insight. Try. What did you let go of that changed everything? What habit did you stop pretending was harmless? What belief did you finally stop arguing for? The question creates the channel. Step 3. Let them speak. This won't feel like hearing a voice. It will feel like remembering something you didn't realize you knew. You'll get a phrase, a sentence, a flash of feeling, a sharp decision. Write it down. Speak it. Don't analyze it. Step 4. Mirror their state. Ask, how does this self breathe? What do they no longer tolerate? What do they already know about what I'm scared of? Then embody that. Not someday. Now. Because the secret is this. Once you've accessed the future self, you don't have to become them. You already are them. You just have to live in the frequency long enough for the world to agree. And when you do, the timeline shifts. That's not poetic. That's how the nervous system stabilizes new behavior. It runs on emotional memory. And every moment you practice being that version of you, your system builds that memory. And once the memory is built, reality responds. People don't notice you're trying. They feel something is different. You move differently. You make faster decisions. You stop needing external proof before acting. You carry the calm certainty of someone who's already seen the ending and lived it. And here's the most unexpected part. Your future self doesn't need you to hustle to catch up. They need you to listen, to stop pretending you don't already know, to stop looping the same old doubts, to stop denying your own clarity because it's uncomfortable. The you who made it isn't waiting to applaud you at the finish line. They're whispering now. Stop playing the version of you that doubts. The scene's over. We need a new role now. Next, we will address the old stories that still haunt you. The failures you still think define you. Because they don't. They never did. And you're about to see why. You've just spoken with the you who made it. Not a metaphor, but a vibrational truth. And something became undeniably clear. They don't carry your failures. Not because they've never failed, but because they don't mistake alternate timelines for identity. It's time you stop doing that too. You are not your worst moments. You are not the job you lost, the person who left, the thing that collapsed. You are not the launch that flopped, the risk that backfired, the apology you never got. You've lived failures, yes, but you never became them. They were timelines, branches, paths you stepped onto for a moment, a season, or a survival phase. But now, you don't live there anymore. And once you realize that, the whole game shifts. Let's break this down. Every time you label something a failure, you're implying it was the wrong path. But wrong according to what? A fantasy version of life where you never made a mistake? A cultural script that says success must be linear? Let it go. Failure isn't a destination. It's a fork in the quantum road. One version of you stayed on that track. But you didn't. You're here. Which means that failure. It's already past tense, energetically and experientially. The mistake is in thinking it still defines you. It doesn't. Here's what most people get wrong about failure. They assume it reveals who they really are. But failure doesn't expose your essence. It exposes your current configuration, a system you can outgrow. Think of it like this. If you fail to set boundaries, that's not your identity. It's a version of you that hadn't yet accessed the ruler archetype. If you failed to follow through, that's not your flaw. It's a moment when the creator inside you wasn't yet stabilized. If you failed to love well, that's not your truth. It's a timeline where the lover had not yet healed. Each failure was just a self, operating with the tools it had. Once you get new tools, you access new selves. And from that place, you can revisit the timeline, not to wallow, but to reclaim. Reclaim the lesson. Reclaim the data. Reclaim the energy. Because energy doesn't die. It waits to be integrated. And when you stop judging the failure, you can extract the insight with surgical clarity. You ask, what was I believing when I chose that? What part of me was active then? What did I need, but didn't know how to ask for? These are not guilt questions. They're keys. Because now, instead of dragging the failure behind you, you stand on it. And it becomes scaffolding. But here's the most powerful part. The moment you detach your identity from the failure, you free up the self who was buried inside it. The you who learned to say no. The you who recalibrated after collapse. The you who became more precise with love, time, and truth. That self is not damaged. They are forged. And once you access them, the shame begins to dissolve. Because shame can't survive in self-understanding. You realize, I wasn't stupid. I was loyal to a version of me that needed more time. I wasn't lazy. I was overwhelmed and unsourced. I wasn't toxic. I was trapped in an identity too small for my becoming. Now that you've seen the real cause, you're free. Free to move forward without dragging dead timelines. Free to meet new opportunities without projecting old grief. Free to let people see you, not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who knows how to reconfigure. That's power. Not perfection. Not a spotless past. But the ability to change frequencies, shift tracks, and keep your signal intact. So next time your mind reaches for the old narrative, this always happens to me. I mess it up every time. I never finish what I start. Pause. That voice is speaking from an old timeline, and you're no longer on it. There's no need to argue. Just switch the channel. Because that's the truth behind failure. It's not a stamp. It's a signal that you were on a version of life that wasn't yours to stay in. And you clearly left it. You're here. You're choosing. You're different. Which means it's time to do more than just walk away from failure. Next, we'll show you how to leap into the timelines that match who you actually are now. You don't need to wait for change. You can jump the track. You've faced the lie of failure. You've separated your self-worth from broken timelines. You've gathered the lessons and freed the energy that was trapped in regret. Now it's time for something more radical. You don't just heal from the past. You jump tracks into an entirely different present. Because thought work isn't enough anymore. You don't need better coping. You need quantum relocation. Here's what that means. Every choice, every emotion, every shift in your self-perception is a track change. Your reality is not fixed. It's responsive. It bends to the frequency of the version of you who's living it. So if you want a different outcome, you don't think about it. You jump to the self who already lives it. Let's say that again. Stop trying to drag your current identity toward the outcome you want. Instead, locate the self who's already living that outcome and shift into them. This isn't visualization. It's relocation. Let's make it real. Step 1. Identify the friction. Where in your life do you feel stuck, bored, or misaligned? That friction is a sign. You're running the wrong self for the reality you're in. Step 2. Name the track you want to be on. Don't generalize. Get sharp. Not, I want to be successful. Say, I want to be the version of me who finishes what she starts and is taken seriously. Not, I want love. Say, I want to be the version of me who no longer entertains emotionally unavailable people, because I'm not that person anymore. Step 3. Lock in the alternate self. Find the posture, the voice, the decisions of the self who lives on that new track. Not hypothetically, Embody it now. Step 4. Make a contradiction move. Choose one action your current self wouldn't take, but the new self would. This is the track jump trigger. It destabilizes the current timeline and signals to your system, we're not in Kansas anymore. Examples. Send the message you've been avoiding. Say no where you usually say yes. Delete the number. Raise the price. Rest unapologetically. Speak the uncomfortable truth. The power is in the contradiction. If your current self agrees with the move, you haven't jumped. Step 5. Hold the field. After the jump, your system may panic. That's normal. The old self will try to reassert control. Let it talk, but don't let it drive. Remember, you're not abandoning yourself. You're just choosing the version that actually matches who you're ready to be. The discomfort? That's the stretch. But hold it long enough, and reality starts updating. People treat you differently. Opportunities reappear. Ideas come faster. Synchronicity increases. Not because you manifested it out of thin air, but because you changed tracks. You're now occupying a version of reality that's coherent with the self you chose. This is the difference between personal development and identity evolution. Development upgrades the current track. Evolution jumps the rails. Let's be clear. Track jumping is not escapism. You're not running from your life. You're running a new frequency of self that leads to different outcomes. You're not avoiding consequences. You're creating different ones on purpose, because you're no longer negotiating with the life that doesn't fit. You're claiming the one that already exists on a frequency you just hadn't tuned to yet. And the more often you jump, the faster your system learns how to stabilize in new identities without panic. Soon, this becomes second nature. Not because it's easy, but because it's encoded. Track jumping is your birthright. You were never meant to stay static. You were built to evolve, switch, upgrade, and shift through timelines like pages in a book you are writing as you read it. And now that you can do this with clarity, next we'll challenge the deepest belief of all, that your identity is internal. Because the truth is, it's not just who you are inside, it's what happens between you and the world. You've jumped timelines. You've left behind identities that no longer match your signal. You've stepped into the versions of yourself who were always waiting in the wings. Now everything changes again, because the next realization doesn't happen in your mind. It happens in your mirror. The world is now your feedback loop. And here's the truth most people never learn. Your identity is not just what you feel. It's not even what you believe. Your identity is what you transmit into your environment, and what the environment reflects back. It exists between you and the people, places, and systems that respond to you. You are not just a self. You are an interface. You show up as one frequency, the world responds to it, and then, based on that reflection, you confirm or question who you think you are. This feedback loop is constant, subconscious, and powerful. Let's unpack it. When you walk into a room expecting rejection, you subtly broadcast withdrawal. You seem aloof, hesitant, tense. People pick up on it and respond with distance. Then you say, "See? I knew I didn't belong." But what actually happened was not proof of your identity. It was a mirrored loop created by what you were already broadcasting. Now flip it. When you step into a room as the version of you who belongs, who leads with calm certainty, who isn't seeking validation but offering value, people feel that too, and they mirror it back. Suddenly, the same environment feels different. But it didn't change. You did. That's how identity lives between you and the world. It's co-authored. Not solely internal. Not fully external. But relational. It's the dance between who you think you are and how the world reflects it back. Here's the danger. Most people outsource their identity to reflection. They wait for confirmation from the world before deciding who they are. If they respect me, I'll feel confident. If they praise me, I'll feel valuable. If they love me, I'll believe I'm lovable. But that's backward. You are not a passive receiver of your self-image. You are a transmitter. And until you transmit with clarity, the reflections will always confuse you. This is why you must become intentional about what you bring into the relational field. It's not manipulation. It's calibration. You walk in and say, not with words, but with frequency, this is who I am. This is what I expect. This is what I accept. And the world begins to reorganize around that broadcast. It doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes the old reflections linger, especially if you're interacting with people conditioned to the old you. But if you stay steady in your new signal, they either adapt or fall away. Either outcome is data. It tells you where congruence lives. This is where boundaries become more than rules. They become frequency stabilizers. Every time you enforce one, you tell the world, I'm no longer broadcasting scarcity. I'm no longer echoing self-betrayal. I'm no longer negotiating with identities I've outgrown. You're not just drawing lines. You're tuning your field. This is where relationships shift. Not because you demanded change, but because you stopped performing the version of yourself that attracted misalignment. When you start showing up differently, the old reflections don't stick. And this is where your deepest transformation becomes visible. Not in your journal, not in your self-talk, but in how your world treats you because of how you treat yourself in its presence. Let's take it further. The mirror effect isn't just interpersonal. It's systemic. Jobs, platforms, algorithms, institutions, they all mirror back who you are being, not who you are wishing to become. When you create from desperation, you attract scarcity. When you speak from clarity, you attract resonance. When you lead from identity, not performance, you generate momentum. And none of this is mystical. It's feedback. So ask yourself, what am I broadcasting? What is the world reflecting back? Where is the loop reinforcing my past instead of reflecting my present? And then shift the signal. Speak the new truth. Stand in the new posture. Choose the new response. Even before the world mirrors it. Especially before the world mirrors it. Because the mirror always takes a moment to update. And during that moment, most people flinch. They revert. They collapse. Don't. Hold your signal. Let the world adjust. Let the people around you recalibrate. Let the old mirrors fall, shatter, or silence. You are no longer a reflection. You are a reference point, and the world will either learn your language or move aside for the ones who already speak it. Next, we'll take that clarity and build a ritual around it. Because once you know identity is relational, it's time to declare it with intention. And watch the field answer back. Now that you've realized identity is relational, a loop between who you're being and what the world reflects, it's time to go even deeper. Because if your frequency broadcasts your identity, then declaring who you are isn't wishful thinking. It's reality programming. You don't declare your identity to impress others. You do it to solidify it in the field. Let's make this clear. The universe doesn't wait for you to prove yourself. It responds to who you say you are. But not with words alone. With frequency. With coherence. With follow-through. This is the practice of self-declaration. It's not about affirmations. It's not about mantras. It's about becoming so clear in who you are that the world can't mistake it, even if it wants to. Self-declaration is not performance. It's permission. You are giving yourself the authority to own what's already yours in the quantum field. Let's break it down. You don't say, I hope I become confident. You declare, I am the frequency of calm certainty. You don't say, I want to be seen. You declare, I am a field that commands attention without noise. You don't say, I'm trying to get better. You declare, I am becoming because I already am. You are not asking reality for permission. You are giving it instruction. But declarations only work when two conditions are met. 1. They are energetically aligned. If you declare a version of yourself you don't feel congruent with, your nervous system will reject it. Don't declare from fantasy. Declare from access. Feel the self first, then speak them. 2. They are backed by choice. A declaration is a commitment. When you say, I am, you're agreeing to act, filter, and move as that version. Not performatively, but consistently. This is how the field responds. Not to the words, to the alignment. Let's take it further. Start each day with one question. Who do I say I am today? Don't rush the answer. Feel for the truth. Is it the builder? The healer? The boundary setter? The sovereign? Each declaration activates a different track, summons different resources, attracts different mirrors. When you speak it out loud, your body begins to sync. Your posture shifts. Your tone adjusts. Your actions follow. It's not magic. It's nervous system recalibration via frequency anchoring. Here's the nuance most miss. Self-declaration isn't about big statements. It's about energetic honesty. Saying, I am unshakable when you feel brittle doesn't help. Saying, I am in process, and my clarity is returning. That is a powerful declaration. It matches your now and bends your next. Because every declaration is both an anchor and a compass. Tells the field, this is where I stand. And it tells your system, this is where we're going. When repeated with coherence, declarations become reality faster than planning ever could. Because planning navigates, but declaring collapses timelines. People will feel it. Your relationships shift. People treat you like your declaration is already true. Not because they believe you, but because you believe you. And coherence is contagious. That's the secret of leadership. It's not charisma. It's clarity. You walk into a room carrying a declaration so steady, so real, so embodied, people align automatically. They take your signal seriously because you do. This is why declarations are not just for journaling. They're for practice, presence, power. You speak them when it's easy, and especially when it's hard. In moments of rejection, fear, uncertainty, you don't beg for feedback. You declare your alignment anyway. And in doing so, you train the world how to meet you. Over time, the reflection stabilizes. Not because you forced it, because you stopped shifting to match every mirror. You became the mirror, and the world caught up. Next, we'll address the strange discomfort that comes when this happens. Because even as your new identity forms, a part of you might whisper, this doesn't feel like me, but that's not failure. It's the signal of transformation, and it means you're closer than ever. You've declared your identity. You've stabilized your signal. You've felt reality begin to echo a new version of you. But now something strange is happening. Tension, tightness, a voice inside that whispers, this feels fake. This doesn't feel like me. And if you're not careful, you might believe it. You might think you've overreached. You might think the new identity doesn't fit. You might think you're being inauthentic. But here's the truth you need to hold. That discomfort you're feeling isn't evidence that something's wrong. It's a sign of progress. Let's be precise. When you adopt a new frequency, identity, or standard, there's a gap between who you've been and who you're becoming. That gap creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. Feels weird. Why? Because your body and brain are pattern-based. They're optimized for the familiar, not the functional. And the moment you shift frequencies, the nervous system has to remap its baseline. The old behaviors no longer match the new belief. The old posture doesn't support the new presence. The old tone of voice clashes with the new role. This isn't inauthenticity. It's integration lag. Your new self isn't fake. It's just new. And you're catching up. Let's break this down. Authenticity isn't about repeating who you've been. It's about aligning with who you're becoming. And that alignment takes time. Time to stabilize. Time to translate across body, speech, emotion, and habit. You're not pretending. You're practicing. And there's a world of difference between the two. Pretending is when you copy someone else. Practicing is when you rehearse your next self until it fits like skin. You're not faking confidence. You're training the frequency of self-trust. You're not faking leadership. You're holding the resonance of clarity until your voice no longer shakes. So let's rewrite the narrative. That feeling of this isn't me doesn't mean stop. It means keep going. It means the old self is starting to fray, but the new self isn't yet fluent. You're in between. And that space, the in-between, is where most people quit. They mistake tension for truth. They assume misalignment means inauthenticity. They retreat into the comfort of the known, even if it no longer serves. But not you. You know better now. You know that discomfort is a sign of self-expansion. You know that awkwardness means you're no longer living from default. You know that your system is learning a new rhythm, and it takes repetition, not retreat. So here's the practice. When the voice says, "You're not this person," you say, "That's true. I'm not the old one anymore either. I'm becoming." When you feel the tension, you don't interpret it as danger. You interpret it as a recalibration in progress. You breathe. You hold the posture. You continue. Let's go deeper. True confidence isn't the absence of awkwardness. It's the willingness to look out of place on the way to alignment. That's how you build real identity coherence. Not by always feeling certain, but by staying loyal to your future self even when your past self resists. That resistance is a reflex. Your past self is losing control, and it's doing what it can to preserve the old configuration. It will say, "You're being dramatic. You're overreaching. People will see through this." That voice is not wise. It's not intuitive. It's not honest. It's scared. So don't fight it. Acknowledge it. Thank it. And continue the rehearsal. You are in the most sacred space of identity transformation, the stretch zone. And this is where you must build emotional fluency for feeling off, without interpreting it as failure. Remember, discomfort is not a verdict. It's a signal. It means you're catching up to the self you already decided to become. Let's get practical. Start tracking your misalignment moments. Where do you still shrink even after making the shift? What situations trigger the impulse to go back to the old self? When does your voice tremble even though your frequency is clear? Write these down. Not to judge, to map, because these are the exact coordinates where your identity is reorganizing in real time. Don't avoid them. Train inside them. That's how you go from trying to being. You practice until fluency arrives. You repeat until the new self feels more familiar than the old. And one day you won't even notice the shift. You'll just move differently, speak differently, walk into rooms without questioning if you belong. Because by then, the stretch will have turned into structure, and the declaration will have become default. Next, we'll explore why this shift doesn't just change you. It changes everything you touch. Because identity is not isolated. It's entangled. And when you change the field. You've stretched. You've tolerated the tension of growth. You've learned how to stay steady in the becoming, even when it felt foreign. Now comes the most transformative realization of all. You don't change in isolation. You change everything you're connected to. This isn't metaphor. It's entanglement. In quantum physics, entanglement means that two particles, once connected, remain linked even when separated. What happens to one instantly affects the other. Your identity works the same way. Every self you've lived was shaped in a network of entanglements. With family, with lovers, with mentors, with enemies, with dreams, with fears. Each one pulled a thread. Each one wove part of your field. And when you change your self pattern, the threads start moving. People feel it. The field shifts. Reactions change. Sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. Why? Because your new frequency disrupts the old agreement. That agreement might have said, "You're the one who stays quiet. You're the one who keeps giving. You're the one who never asks for more. You're the one who's always broken." When you stop being that self, the entangled relationships must recalibrate. Some try to pull you back. Not out of malice, but out of entanglement memory. They feel your shift before they understand it. And their system says, "Wait, if you change, we all have to change." That's not resistance. That's physics. Let's go deeper. You've noticed this already. You shift a boundary and someone gets angry. You upgrade your standard and an old friend ghosts. You speak your truth and a relationship fractures. These aren't failures. They are field responses. Your new self destabilizes the old system. And the only question is, will you stay loyal to your new frequency? Most don't. They interpret pushback as rejection. They collapse into guilt. They negotiate with their past selves just to maintain old entanglements. But if you're reading this, you already know. The cost of staying small is no longer worth the comfort it buys. You don't exist to keep others comfortable. You exist to transmit a clean signal. And that signal, when held, begins to entangle everything around it at a higher level. Let's say that again. When you stabilize your upgraded identity, you don't just lose connections. You repattern them. Your family starts mirroring new respect. Your clients meet you at your new price. Your friendships become more reciprocal. Your community begins to self-select. You don't have to cut people off. You hold your frequency, and the field filters itself. That's the physics of becoming. You don't force change. You entangle reality with your new signal and let resonance do the rest. But this requires something rare, energetic integrity, which means you don't shrink to avoid discomfort. You don't wobble when your clarity is challenged. You don't seek constant validation before choosing what's already true. Instead, you become consistent in frequency, even when the environment hasn't caught up yet. And then, the environment begins to catch up. People who dismissed you now ask for your insight. Situations that used to trigger you now feel neutral. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach arrive, because you are now reachable by them. Let's ground this in practice. Start noticing your energetic entanglements. Ask, who am I still performing an old version of myself for? Where am I collapsing my frequency to maintain false harmony? What parts of me come alive, and which go silent, depending on who's in the room? These are not signs of failure. They are maps. They show you where the old entanglements live, and where your identity still leaks. Seal the leaks. Choose your frequency. Hold your pattern. Let the field do what it does, reorganize. This is not selfish. It's systemic evolution, because when one thread changes, the entire web moves. And the ripple effect of your transformation might be the exact force someone else needed to access their own. You're not just becoming a new self. You're becoming a portal. Next, we'll explore what that means. Because you're not just changing your identity anymore. You're becoming an access point for others to change, too. You've disentangled. You've stabilized your new frequency. You've watched relationships, environments, and even opportunities shift in response. But now something even more profound is happening. People are drawn to you not just for what you say, but for what they feel around you. They feel clear when you're present. They speak with more honesty. They access parts of themselves that were previously locked. That's not charisma. That's not charm. That's field access. You're no longer just a persona. You've become a portal. Let's clarify this. A persona is what you project. It's curated, shaped, presented. Portal is what you transmit. It doesn't perform. It doesn't seek approval. It opens a space. When you become a portal, you're not just embodying your identity, you're radiating a frequency that invites others to access theirs. This is not a metaphor. It's a literal shift in how energy moves through you. Think back. You've likely experienced someone like this. A mentor, teacher, or stranger who didn't need to teach you anything. But somehow, being near them unlocked something in you. You walked away thinking differently, feeling braver, acting with more clarity. That wasn't magic. That was coherence. They were holding a signal long enough and strong enough that your system resonated with it without instruction. Now it's your turn. You're becoming the access point. Here's how this works. Every self carries a specific vibrational blueprint. When that blueprint becomes stable, it creates a field, a kind of energetic atmosphere around you. People stepping into your field feel that atmosphere. And without even realizing it, they begin tuning themselves to your signal. This is why identity work is never just personal. When you embody a high-fidelity self, others feel permission. Permission to speak honestly, raise their standards, exit old patterns, claim parts of themselves they were hiding. You didn't lecture them. You didn't fix them. You existed differently. That's power. And with it comes responsibility. Because when you're a portal, your state matters more than your strategy. You don't need perfect words. You need energetic coherence. You don't need to impress. You need to transmit congruence. So here's the question. What field do people enter when they enter you? Do they feel regulated or rattled? Do they access clarity or tension? Do they come away closer to their truth or more confused? This isn't about judgment. It's about awareness. Because once you realize you're a portal, you become responsible for your field. Let's make it actionable. Step 1. Define your transmission. What are people meant to remember about themselves after being around you? Not what they think of you, what they reclaim about themselves. Do they remember their courage, their creativity, their calm, their standard, their worth? Name it. Step 2. Clean your field. You cannot transmit clarity while holding unresolved resentment, shame, or distortion. That doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. Every time you clear an old pattern, you open more bandwidth for transmission. Every time you forgive a past self, you become safer to others. Not soft, safe. Because people don't feel judged by someone who no longer judges themselves. Step 3. Maintain the transmission under pressure. This is where true portals are forged. Can you hold your frequency when someone doubts you? Can you stay coherent when the environment shifts? Can you offer space for transformation even when no one gives you credit? Because being a portal isn't about performance. It's about energetic stability. The longer you can stay in your signal without flinching, collapsing, or apologizing, the stronger your field becomes. And the more people you quietly activate just by being. You don't even need to try. Your silence will provoke clarity. Your presence will call people into alignment. Your walk into the room will shift its tone. And if you ever wonder if it's working, listen carefully. People will say, "Something about you feels different. I always feel more grounded after we talk. I had a breakthrough and I don't know why." You'll know why. Because you stopped trying to control your impact and started living your coherence. You became a portal. And portals don't force doors open. They are the door. Next, we'll take this one step further. Because portals don't just open spaces, they lead. Let's explore how quantum identity becomes quantum leadership. And why the new leaders aren't loud. They're tuned. You've become a portal. Not just for your own growth, but for others to access parts of themselves. You're no longer trying to lead by force. You're leading by frequency. This is quantum leadership. And it's not a style. It's a state. Let's define it. Quantum leadership is the ability to influence reality, not by control or charisma, but by holding a coherent signal so strong that others reorganize around it. It's not about making people follow you. It's about becoming impossible to ignore, because your presence is aligned with your pattern. People don't follow you because you're the loudest. They follow you because you're the clearest. They feel safer near your signal than inside their own noise. That's leadership. Not performance. Not perfection. Clarity. Let's get honest. We've been conditioned to think leadership is about dominance. The one who speaks most, decides most, directs most. But that's outdated. The world is shifting. The new leaders aren't shouting over the chaos. They're becoming so deeply congruent that they quiet the chaos just by existing. Here's how. Quantum leaders have 4 core traits. 1. Internal congruence. Their inner dialogue matches their external action. No double lives. No contradiction. Just alignment. 2. Energetic gravity. They don't chase attention. Their frequency attracts exactly what belongs and repels what doesn't. 3. Relational precision. They know which entanglements serve their mission and which dilute it. They choose connection from clarity, not guilt. 4. Identity agility. They shift selves with precision. They know when to activate the strategist, the healer, the visionary, the boundary setter. They don't get stuck in one version. That's what makes them magnetic. Now, let's break this into practice. Step 1. Lead from signal, not story. Your story might be powerful, but it's not your power. Your signal, your embodied frequency, is what creates change. The question is, can you lead without needing your history as a crutch? Can you let go of the need to be understood and become someone who is simply felt? Step 2. Create identity space for others. You don't lead by convincing. You lead by creating fields of permission. When your frequency is clean, others feel the space to rise. You don't have to tell them how. They just do. This works in teams, in relationships, in creative collaborations. Your field sets the standard. You never have to micromanage again. Step 3. Collapse the ego performance loop. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being consistent in your transmission. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when others project onto you. Even when you don't get the recognition you think you deserve. The quantum leader doesn't need applause. They need resonance. And when they don't get it, they tune, not chase. Step 4. Hold the standard, even when alone. Because true leadership begins in the unseen. Can you live your values when no one's watching? Can you stay in alignment when the room isn't validating you? That's the mark of coherence. And coherence is leadership. Let's be clear. You don't need more tactics. You need more signal stability. Because once your identity is consistent, your field becomes predictable in power. People know what to expect from you. Your presence becomes an anchor, and your influence becomes inevitable. This is the future of leadership. Not noise, not hierarchy, not charisma built on sand, but coherence, clarity, and conscious identity evolution. You don't have to convince anyone you're a leader. Be the clearest signal in the room, and watch what happens. Next, we go from influence to integration. Because leading others starts with leading yourselves, all of them. It's time to learn how to live as a multidimensional identity. Without fragmentation, you've activated the leader, not by command or title but by coherence. Now it's time to meet the challenge behind the power. How do you hold all yourselves without fragmenting? Because here's the truth you already feel. You are not one personality. You are a collection, chorus, a constellation of identities, each tuned to different needs, timelines, and contexts. And if you're not careful, that multiplicity starts to feel like contradiction. One part of you is visionary, another is terrified, one is strategic, another wants to run, one is ready to speak truth, another just wants peace. You've lived as these selves, some simultaneously, some secretly, and now, the question isn't which one is real, it's how do I live as all of them without chaos? The answer isn't to collapse your identity into one static version. The answer is inner governance. Let's break it down. Multiplicity is not a flaw. It's the architecture of consciousness. Every self within you has a function, a tone, a wisdom, but without governance, they compete. You feel like you're all over the place. You contradict yourself. You can't trust your decisions. You burn out trying to be everything everywhere all at once. That's not because you're unstable. It's because no one's leading the council. So let's install governance. Here's how. Step 1. Identify your inner roles. List the primary selves you operate from, especially the ones that show up most often. These might include the strategist, the healer, the artist, the protector, the child, the rebel, the visionary, the shadow. Name them without judgment. Each self carries data. Step 2. Assign each self a domain. The strategist should not be in charge of romance. The inner child should not run your business. The artist shouldn't negotiate contracts. When the wrong self is steering, confusion follows. But when each self operates within its genius zone, you get coherence and creativity. Step 3. Appoint a primary conductor. This is the you that governs the system. Not a tyrant. Not a suppressor. A conductor. Their job is not to silence the others, but to guide the harmony. When there's conflict between selves, the conductor decides not by authority but by alignment. Ask, which self's perspective matches the reality I'm building now? Which voice is reactive and which one is clear? Who gets the mic and who can rest? This is emotional leadership. It's how you become a cohesive system, not a war zone. Step 4. Practice intentional self-activation. Don't wait for a situation to summon a version of you. Choose which self leads each context. Before a tough conversation, activate the boundary setter. Before creative work, call on the artist. Before rest, let the nurturer speak. This turns identity into instrumentation. You're no longer reacting, you're composing. This practice gives you 3 things. Clarity. You know who you're being and why. Efficiency. You stop wasting time in identity confusion. Stability. You trust yourself because your selves trust you. Here's the deeper benefit. When all your selves feel heard, valued, and utilized properly, your system relaxes. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're operating as a multidimensional unity. This is where internal chaos dissolves into internal agency. Let's ground this with a metaphor. Think of your identity like a team of advisors. Each has expertise. Each has experience. But without a leader, they talk over each other and nothing gets done. With a leader, precision, speed, power. That's you now. You don't need to become one thing. You need to become the one who knows when to become what. This is the difference between ego switching and conscious self-selection. You're not being fake. You're being fluid. And that fluidity is how evolution happens. You're not broken. You're symphonic. And when your inner orchestra is aligned, people feel the harmony, even if they can't name it. They trust you, follow you, feel safe around you, not because you're perfect, because you're internally governed. So if you ever catch yourself thinking, I'm too much, remind yourself, you are not too much. You are too multi for a world that worships simplicity. And that's not your problem. That's your power. Next, we'll make it sustainable. Because holding many selves is not a one-time activation. It requires rituals to remember who you can be and stay connected to the full spectrum of your identity. Let's build them. You've organized the orchestra. You've claimed the role of internal conductor. You now know how to live as many without breaking into fragments. But clarity fades. Habits pull you back. Familiar chaos whispers its old song. So how do you keep your identity spectrum active without drifting back into default? You build rituals, not routines, not habits, rituals. Why? Because rituals don't just structure time. They encode identity. They help you remember who you're becoming before the world forgets for you. Let's define it. A ritual is a symbolic, embodied action that links a specific version of you to this moment in time. It's a bridge, a key, a mirror, and you need them because the world is designed to pull you into simplification. Be one thing. Be consistent. Don't confuse us. But you are plural. And your rituals are how you stay loyal to that plurality without apology. Let's build them. Ritual 1, the self-awakening cue. Start your day not with a to-do list, but with a self-selection. Ask, who needs to lead today? Don't think in emotions. Think in identities. Today, is it the strategist, the creator, the warrior, the listener? Then create a cue, a gesture, a word, an outfit, a breath that tells your system, activate that self now. You're not hoping to be your best. You're summoning the version of you who fits the day. Ritual 2, the mirror reclamation. Once a day, stand in front of a mirror, not to check your flaws, to speak a declaration. Look directly into your eyes and say something you know is true, even if it's not yet visible. I am no longer the self who tolerates half versions of anything. I am safe to be seen in every dimension. I am not seeking permission. I am issuing a frequency. Speak it out loud. Anchor it. The mirror doesn't show you who you are. You do. Ritual 3, the shadow dinner. Once a week, light a candle. Sit in silence. Invite one of your disowned selves to the table. Maybe it's the angry you, the jealous you, the selfish you. Ask them, what are you trying to protect me from? What do you need me to finally understand? What power have I buried in you? Listen, don't fix, just host. This is how you prevent fragmentation, by letting every self know they have a seat at your inner table. Ritual 4, the timeline journal. Write to your alternate selves. Not about them, to them. Dear version of me who never quit. Dear me who left that relationship 6 months earlier. Dear me who said yes to the scary thing. Write as if they're real. Because they are. This keeps your multidimensionality alive. And sometimes they'll write back. In dreams, insights, or gut instincts. Ritual 5, the identity bath. Once a month, create space to shed a skin. Symbolically, with music, water, incense, movement. Whatever helps you feel the death of an outdated self. Say it aloud. I release the self who. I no longer serve the version of me who I am willing to let go of. Then emerge. Dress like the next self. Move like them. Speak like them. Mark the transition. Ritual is how we make the invisible visceral. It's how we stop waiting for life to tell us who we are, and begin telling life what to reflect back. But there's one final truth here. Ritual isn't about control. It's about relationship. With your becoming. With your multiverse of selves. With the sacred act of identity as a living, breathing field. Ritual keeps you from drifting. It interrupts the trance of normalcy. It reactivates the memory of what you're capable of. It reminds you that becoming is not a task. It's a practice. So next time you forget, don't fix. Ritualize. Because you're not here to repeat. You're here to remember. And as your memory sharpens, something becomes possible that was never possible before. You stop needing to chase time. And instead, you start traveling it through identity. Next, we go beyond the present. We'll use your inner selves to time travel, not metaphorically, but energetically, to retrieve the wisdom you left behind, and the guidance that future you is already offering. You've built the rituals. You've stabilized the multiverse within. You're fluent in selves, fluid in function, and focused in becoming. Now you're ready for the shift that bends time. Because time is not a straight line. And identity is not stuck in sequence. Every version of you, past, future, possible, is accessible now. Not because of imagination, because of frequency. Here's the breakthrough. You don't need a machine to time travel. You need a felt connection to a different version of yourself in a different timeline, and a system trained to receive what they know. That's not poetic. That's quantum. Let's unpack this. The self is not a static identity locked into chronological flow. The self is an energy pattern, shifting, branching, updating, which means your 8-year-old self, your 85-year-old self, and your most successful alternate self are all running in parallel. They don't live in your memory. They live in your field. And when you learn how to tune into them, not as ideas but as real-time resources, you open access to knowledge that your linear self would take years to reach. Let's make this practical. Time travel through identity begins with one premise. You can send and receive information across timelines by shifting states. Because each version of you, every age, every choice, every turning point, carries a specific frequency. You don't have to remember the moment. You just have to match the frequency. And suddenly, you're there. You feel what they felt. You think what they thought. You access what they knew or refused to know. This isn't nostalgia. This is retrieval. Let's walk through two pathways. 1. Backward time travel, healing and retrieval. You're not here to heal your inner child. You're here to visit them as proof that they made it. Start here. Close your eyes. Breathe into your chest, not to calm, but to open. Call forward a version of yourself that got frozen in pain, confusion, or disempowerment. The self who didn't speak up. The self who lost something. The self who watched everything fall apart. Stand in front of them, not to save them, but to witness them. And say, I am the one you became. Let that land. Then ask, what do you wish someone had said to you? What part of your power did you bury to survive? What decision did you make that's still running today? Listen. You'll feel it. A phrase. A memory. Posture shift. Don't judge it. Receive it. Because you're not here to rescue your past. You're here to retrieve the energy that got locked in it. Now integrate. Speak the truth they couldn't. Make the choice they feared. Break the pattern they inherited. That's time travel. Not fantasy. Function. 2. Forward time travel, guidance and access. You've done this already. Called your future self. Asked for insight. Felt the version of you who's already successful, stable, whole. Now let's make it structured. Ask, which version of me already lives the life I want? What timeline are they standing in? What do they know about my current struggle that I don't? Again, don't visualize. Feel. Drop into posture. Breath pattern. Tone of voice. Anchor it. Then ask, what would you have me know right now? The response won't be loud. It will feel like remembering, a sudden calm, a sentence, a knowing. Write it, speak it, act from it. That's forward retrieval. You didn't imagine success. You pulled it into now through identity alignment. This is how you accelerate your timeline. Not by hustling, by collapsing the distance between who you are and who already knows. Let's bring it full circle. Time travel through identity is not about fantasy. It's about conscious access. You are not limited by your age, or your past, or your so-called timeline. You're limited only by your signal literacy. And now you're fluent. You know how to tune in, receive, reprogram, integrate. So use it. Build real-world rituals around this access. Speak aloud to past and future selves. Set intentions from your 10-year later self. Release trauma by standing in front of the version of you who already let it go. This is not symbolic work. It's structural. And the more you train it, the more time bends around your clarity. Old wounds stop defining you. Missed chances stop haunting you. Futures stop feeling far away. Because you're no longer trying to get there. You are bringing them here. And just when you thought this was about your journey, something bigger emerges. Your identity isn't just evolving. It's already creating ripples across timelines. Your impact isn't coming. It's already echoing. Next, you'll see what that really means. Because your legacy isn't what you'll leave behind. It's what versions of you are already living forward. You've time traveled. You've retrieved wisdom. You've collapsed the illusion that identity must unfold one page at a time. Now we turn to something most people wait too long to consider. Legacy. Not as memory, not as monument, but as a multiversal current already flowing through timelines you've touched, versions of you that already live, and people who haven't met you but are shaped by your field. Let's rewrite everything you've been told about legacy. Legacy is not what happens after you die. It's what happens every time you choose a self that wasn't expected of you. It's not a static thing you leave behind. It's an energetic trail that expands every time you collapse fear and choose alignment. Let's be clear. Every choice you've made from coherence, not convenience, has rippled. Maybe you didn't see it. Maybe the world didn't applaud it. Maybe your name isn't in lights. But that version of you who left the relationship, changed the pattern, spoke the truth. That version is still alive, and their resonance continues forward. Here's what most miss. Legacy doesn't require an audience. It requires a field transmission. When you hold a clean signal that frequency imprints on people, systems, timelines, you leave behind a feeling, a standard, a memory of possibility. Someone you'll never meet will take a risk because you did. Someone in your bloodline will break a cycle because you already did. Someone in your future will feel less alone because you held the line when it was hard. That's legacy, and it's already happening. You're not building a future, you're echoing across it. So let's go deeper. Ask yourself, which version of me already lives in someone else's inspiration? What frequency am I normalizing for others by existing this way? What field am I transmitting not just when I speak, but when I live? This isn't about being important. It's about being intentional. Because the truth is, your legacy doesn't wait until you're done. It builds itself every time you choose identity over insecurity. Every time you forgive your past self, speak without apology, exit a room that no longer fits, create from wholeness, say yes to the self that scares you. You write code into the field, and that code gets picked up, carried, reflected, multiplied. This is why your impact is not linear. You won't always know who it reaches. You may never see the full effect. But legacy isn't measured in metrics. It's measured in morphic resonance, the invisible memory the field holds after you've changed it. Think of it like this. You're not trying to make history. You're training reality to remember a new frequency. And every time you stay loyal to that frequency, you make it easier for someone else to do the same. Let's ground it. Start recording your legacy in real time. Not just your achievements, your identity decisions. Create a document, a journal, private voice memo archive. Each entry answers, who did I choose to be today that my old self never would have imagined? What pattern did I stop performing for the first time? What did I normalize in my field without needing permission? This isn't about bragging. It's about witnessing yourself as a legacy in motion. Because you are. You are not here to be remembered. You are here to remind the field what's possible. And when you live like that, you'll stop needing validation. Because you'll know, you're not writing a legacy. You are one. Next, we break the final illusion that you must find yourself. You won't. You'll create yourself and then recreate again. It's time to dismantle the myth of the singular self once and for all. You've tracked your legacy. You've seen how every coherent choice sends ripples across timelines, relationships, and realities. Now, we bring our attention to one of the most persistent illusions in identity work. The myth that you must find yourself. Let's say this without hesitation. You will not find yourself, because there is no single version of you, hiding somewhere, waiting to be discovered. There is only the self you decide to sculpt, activate, and live. Let's dismantle this once and for all. The phrase "find yourself" implies that you are a fixed truth, pre-made template, something buried, waiting to be uncovered like treasure. But you are not a secret. You are a choice. And that choice is made moment by moment, timeline by timeline, signal by signal. People spend years trying to find their real self, but all they're really doing is trying to locate a version of themselves that feels safe to stay inside. They want a singular identity that says, this is me. This is fixed. This doesn't have to change again. But identity that doesn't evolve becomes a prison. So here's the reframe. Stop trying to find yourself. Start creating yourself. Not from scratch, from signal. Because now you have the tools. You understand the physics. You know how to select a self, embody it, speak from it, stabilize it, transmit it. So why are you still waiting for permission? Why are you still hoping that one day you'll wake up and feel like you? That moment won't come from waiting. It will come from building. You want to feel authentic? Start sculpting your identity from clarity, not reaction. You want to feel real? Create the version of you who speaks, walks, thinks, and relates in alignment with what matters to you most. Not who you've been told to be, not who's most comfortable, not who's least controversial, but who's most true by your standard, not theirs. Let's go deeper. Ask yourself, if I stopped trying to find me, what would I start choosing? What if there is no right self, only a resonant one? What would I stop waiting for if I believed identity was a craft, not a category? These questions are not intellectual. They're revolutionary, because they demand that you shift from seeker to sculptor. The seeker waits for clarity to arrive. The sculptor picks up the chisel and makes it. The seeker looks for signs. The sculptor becomes the signal. So let's give you permission right now. You don't owe anyone a final version of yourself. Not your partner, not your parents, not your audience, not your past self. You're allowed to keep sculpting, keep shape-shifting, keep upgrading. And not because you're broken, but because you're brave. Most people stay in pre-made selves. You're building one no one's seen before. And here's the truth that will anchor this forever. You are not a self to be found. You are a self to be forged. From vision, from vibration, from conscious, ongoing creation. Let's make this actionable. Here's a prompt to end the finding story for good. Write a letter to your imagined future self. But this time, don't ask them to reveal themselves. Instead, tell them what you've decided to become. Example, I'm no longer looking for you. I'm becoming the version of me who speaks clearly, moves deliberately, and no longer tries to belong in places I've outgrown. I'm done asking who I am. I'm answering. Read that back daily if you must. Anchor it. Own it. Because from this point forward, every time you catch yourself saying, I just want to find myself, interrupt it with, no, I'm sculpting who I choose to be next. That's what makes your presence magnetic. That's what builds legacy in real time. That's what separates you from the culture of static identities. You are not here to arrive at a self. You are here to generate it moment by moment, pattern by pattern. And if anyone tells you that being fluid is a lack of commitment, smile. Because you're not indecisive. You're infinitely possible. Next, we'll address the final cultural resistance you'll face. The demand that you be one thing. Let's destroy that lie completely. You've released the myth of finding yourself. You've stepped into the creative force of becoming. But here comes the pushback. From culture, from old stories, from the voice that still whispers. Pick a lane. Be one thing. Clarity means simplicity. Let's call it what it is. A form of spiritual and intellectual violence. Because you were never built to be one thing. You were built to contain multitudes. And the demand that you narrow yourself is not clarity, it's control. Let's be real. The world feels safer when people are easy to define. Oh, they're the smart one. She's the spiritual one. He's the entrepreneur. They're the artist. Labels are language's attempt to freeze what is fluid. But you are not freeze-frame material. You are kinetic, living, shifting. And trying to fit yourself into one container is like trying to pour the ocean into a measuring cup. It was never meant to work. Here's the new understanding. Multiplicity is not confusion. It's evolution. You don't figure yourself out. You unfold across timelines, tasks, dreams, and roles. And the faster you accept that, the freer you become. Let's name what you really are. A strategist and a mystic. A creator and a destroyer. A teacher and an eternal student. A warrior and a nurturer. Not one after the other. Simultaneously, sequentially, fluidly. The version of you who builds systems is not in conflict with the one who dances through chaos. They both belong. So what's the real skill? Learning when each self is required. That's not confusion. That's mastery. Let's reframe the question that's been haunting you. Who am I supposed to be? Answer. You are not supposed to be a thing. You are here to be many on purpose. And that includes contradiction, expansion, growth, death, rebirth, reselection. You'll confuse people. You'll lose people. Good. You weren't meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be remembered by the ones who feel resonance, not simplicity. Let's go practical. Anytime you feel the pull to simplify yourself for clarity's sake, ask, am I dimming myself to make someone else comfortable? Am I reducing myself because complexity feels hard to explain? Am I abandoning a self that's actually vital, just to be more consistent? Then reclaim it. Say aloud, I am not one thing. I am a symphony. I will not mute my range for your certainty. Because once you own that, something wild happens. Your presence becomes unmistakable. Not because people can define you, but because they can feel you. Not one-dimensional. Not simple. Just true. Here's a truth few will say aloud. The clearest people are rarely the simplest. They're the most integrated. They've taken all their parts, harmonized them, and stopped apologizing for taking up complex space. And that's what you're doing now. So next time someone says, you've changed, you're all over the place, you used to be so clear, say, I'm clearer than ever. You're just no longer comfortable with range. Let that be enough. Let your fullness speak louder than your labels. Let your evolution outpace their comfort. And keep going, because the most powerful version of you is the one who no longer fears being too much. You are not a puzzle to solve. You are a multidimensional identity in perpetual motion. Own it. Next, we explore the one transformation that makes space for all others. The death of the self that clings. You'll learn how to die before you die, and live as a liberated identity on the other side. You've accepted your range. You've stopped reducing yourself for clarity. You've allowed the full spectrum of who you are to take up space. But now you've reached the most sacred transition of all. Not into more, but through release. It's time to learn how to die before you die, not as a tragedy, but as transformation. This is not metaphor. It's energetic, psychological, real. The self that brought you this far cannot take you further, and if you try to keep dragging it forward, it will begin to decay, not evolve. There's a version of you right now that still clings to familiar habits, outdated loyalties, comfort-driven roles, fear-based stories, ego-driven survival strategies. That version has done its job, protected you, helped you build, got you here, but its time is done. And the more you keep trying to sustain it, the more you'll feel resistance, burnout, and misalignment. This is the invitation. Let it die. Let the version of you that's driven by proving, performing, or pleasing expire. This death is not a loss. It's a liberation. But here's the mistake most people make. They wait for the death to happen to them. Through collapse, through chaos, through a forced identity crisis. Instead of making it conscious, let's make it conscious now. Ask yourself, which version of me am I keeping alive out of obligation? What identity have I outgrown, but still cling to for safety? What role no longer fits, but I perform because it earns me validation? Name it, speak it out loud, then say, I honor this self for its work, but it no longer defines me. I release it fully. You may cry, you may resist, you may feel nothing. All valid. Death is not loud. It's often a soft exhale. But something shifts, because once a self dies, its grip loosens. You stop trying to be liked by the people it attracted. You stop chasing the goals it thought mattered. You stop fearing the judgment it once built its walls against. And in its place, spaciousness. But beware, after the death comes the void. That space between the old self's exit and the next self's clarity. Feels like confusion, silence, drift, numbness, weightlessness. Don't panic. This isn't regression. This is the in-between, the cocoon, the place where identity liquefies before it restructures. Let yourself be in it. No need to force meaning. No need to announce transformation. Just be the field where a self once stood and now dissolves. This space is sacred, because here your nervous system resets, your instincts rewire, your signal clears, and from this field, a new identity emerges, not rushed, not installed like a software update, birthed from stillness, from silence, from truth. This is not becoming someone new. This is becoming what was blocked by who you no longer need to be, the version of you that can lead without apology. Finally has room, the one who creates without censorship. Finally breathes, the one who holds standards without shame. Finally stands, all because the outdated self has been laid to rest. And here's the thing, you don't just do this once. You will die 1,000 small deaths in a single lifetime. Every time you release an identity that outlived its purpose. Every time you stop performing an old role out of habit. Every time you choose evolution over attachment. You die well, and dying well means living free. So if today feels like an ending, let it be. Don't rush to replace it with a next. Sit in the space. Let the funeral be quiet and holy, because what comes after this is not another version of your personality. It's a new dimension of being. And that version of you is not just a person. There's something else entirely. Next, you'll meet that version. Not a self, but a god of selves. You've grieved the outdated version. You've stood in the sacred silence where identity dissolves. You've made space for something else to emerge. Not another personality, but a higher order of presence. This is the final truth before the merge. You are not just a person made of many selves. You are a god of selves, a consciousness capable of conjuring, commanding, and coherently living across dimensions. Let's strip away the hesitation. This is not ego. This is structure. You are not divine because you're special. You are divine because you're sovereign over your internal reality. And that sovereignty has matured. You're no longer just aware of your multiple identities. You've mastered them. They orbit you, not in chaos but in coordination. Let's clarify this shift. Up until now, you've been stepping into individual versions of yourself, choosing, embodying, stabilizing. But now you realize, You are not those identities. You are the one who generates them. They are your instruments, and you are the composer. This is the move from identity to divinity, not in myth, in mechanics. A god of selves is not a mythological being. It's a state of integrated multiplicity governed by clear will. You now summon the self that's needed. Speak from archetype without collapse. Create new internal roles when the situation calls for it. Retire old ones when they've served their course. Maintain clarity even in contradiction. This is not personality. It's presence. And your presence now carries transmission power. Because you're no longer shifting between selves like costumes. You're activating dimensions of intelligence like a divine architect. That's the core shift. From identity juggling to dimensional orchestration. Let's name the signs you've entered this state. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You don't chase recognition. You speak with silence as your ally. You create without waiting for proof. You sense when others are stuck in singularity, and you open space for their expansion. People around you begin to change, not because you're trying to change them, but because your field destabilizes their limitations. This is what divinity feels like. Grace without performance, power without domination, transmission without volume, space holding without depletion. Let's go even deeper. When you fully step into this God state, you realize you are not here to collapse into your most aligned self. You're here to govern the entire constellation, strategically, intuitively, sacredly. You were never meant to become just one version of yourself and stay there. You were meant to keep birthing new ones. From insight, from necessity, from desire, from expansion. Let this liberate you. You don't owe consistency to anyone. Your identity is not your brand. It's your frequency composition. And the more you master it, the more your environment becomes responsive, not rigid. Reality starts shaping itself around your presence. Because your field carries instruction. Instruction for truth, possibility, depth, power, permission, and not because you said so, because you became it. This is divine multiplicity. The God of selves is not worshipped. They are witnessed. And when others witness you, they remember parts of themselves they thought were lost. You don't need followers. You leave wakefulness behind you like a trail. Let's land this. You are now living from a different plane. Not above others. Not disconnected from Earth, but anchored in sovereignty. You have released outdated selves, refused identity reduction, consciously constructed new internal roles, activated field coherence, transmitted multidimensional intelligence. You are no longer seeking identity. You are source. The mirror is no longer your reference point. The mirror now reflects you. And as you walk forward from this chapter, the final integration calls, not to stay as a god of selves, but to become the one who remembers everything. Next, the final merge. You've walked every version, shifted frequencies, resurrected timelines, collapsed personas, released identities like skins. You've spoken with the past, received from the future, led from the present. Now only one frontier remains, not becoming someone new, not finding the next self, not jumping to the next quantum possibility, but merging with the one who remembers all of it. This is not the destination. This is integration at scale. Every version of you, brave and afraid, shattered and sovereign, dormant and divine, lives inside the you who now steps forward. You are no longer a shapeshifter. You are the one who holds the shape of all shapes. You don't need to become anyone else. You've already been everyone else. Now, you hold the memory of multiplicity. And in that memory, you find something deeper than confidence. You find certainty. Not certainty in facts or futures. Certainty in self-containment. You don't need another shift. You can shift. You will shift again. But you are no longer shifting to escape. You are shifting from choice, not fracture. Let's break this down. The final merge is the moment when the identity field stabilizes into a singular consciousness of coherence. All your timelines report to you, all your archetypes Rest within you, all your fragments. Fold into functional form. You are not the strategist. You're the one who activates strategy. You're not the creator. You're the one who commands creation. You're not the shadow. You're the one who carries the keys to its cave. And because of this, you are no longer afraid of contradiction. You are the resolve of contradiction. You are not asking, which self is real? You're knowing, all of them are me, expressing different truths through different filters. And now those filters are transparent. You can feel the warrior without becoming reactive. You can feel the inner child without abandoning boundaries. You can feel the archetype without losing your uniqueness. You are lucid inside the dream of identity. That's the merge. Feels like stillness, access, reverence, flexibility, clarity that doesn't need volume. It feels like walking into a room and knowing exactly which frequency to wear. And doing it without effort, because there's no more pretending, no more posturing, no more proving. You don't need to be loud. You are loud because your presence carries memory. Memory of the journey. You remember when you clung to a single self. You remember when you thought change was betrayal. You remember when you fragmented under pressure. And now, you don't break. You bend. You flex. You select. You navigate identity like a dimension, not a dilemma. And you do it without leaving your seat. This seat, your center, is not a throne. It's a frequency control room. From here, you speak in tones that people don't just hear, they feel. Your words carry layers. Your stillness speaks as much as your strategy. Your gaze is not judgment, it's access. People feel unlocked around you, not because you try to be a mirror, but because you are a living record of becoming. This is what the you who knows all this can now do. Transmit safety without softness. Speak precision without sharpness. Offer vision without ego. Shape timelines with subtle decisions. Recognize in others what they haven't yet remembered about themselves. And all of this, it requires no effort. Because when you merge fully, you no longer manage your identity. You inhabit it. You live as a full-spectrum being. Quiet not because you lack clarity. Powerful not because you need control. Present because there's nowhere left to run. You've arrived. Not at a destination. At a dimension of selfhood so sovereign it needs no defense. You don't protect this version. You channel it. You don't announce it. You are it. Let's make it clear. This isn't the peak of the mountain. There's no summit. There's just this knowing. You contain infinity now, and it no longer overwhelms you. You were never supposed to choose one version of yourself and discard the others. You were supposed to become the one who could hold them all wisely. And now you do. So breathe. Feel the weight of selfhood drop away. Not because identity is gone, but because it is now light. Worn like silk. Woven like signal. Accessible like air. You don't need to be known anymore. Because you've met the you who already knows. And in that knowing, you are complete. Not finished. Just whole. Every identity before this was a door. Every archetype a step. Every transformation a tool. Now the builder is here. Not to keep building, but to live in what's been built. So don't look back in search of old names. And don't look forward in fear of forgetting this truth. Because once you merge, the remembering is automatic. Your nervous system remembers. Your field remembers. Your voice remembers. Your silence remembers. You are no longer the traveler. You are the terrain. Let it be enough. Let it be holy. Let this be the breath you didn't know you were holding. You have arrived into your own memory. And from here, everything begins again.